Blood pooled beneath the stretcher as paramedics wheeled the unconscious man through automatic doors. The nurse blocking their path didn't move. "You're not bringing him through here unconscious without documentation," she said. Police Sergeant David Halstead shoved past her shoulder. "Get out of my way!" The nurse's hand shot out, not to push back, but to check the patient's pulse. 3 seconds. Her fingers found the carotid artery, pressed, counted. "His pressure's dropping. You moved him wrong." Halstead's face went red. "I don't take orders from some—" "Then he dies in your custody." Her voice didn't rise, didn't waver. "Your choice." What Sergeant Halstead didn't know was that the quiet woman standing in his way had spent 4 years keeping dying soldiers alive in places the government wouldn't acknowledge existed. And tonight, he'd just made the worst mistake of his career. Before we go further, if you want to see how this story ends, how the powerful finally fall, and how one woman's silence became the loudest truth this city ever heard, stay with me until the very end. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in Redfield General Hospital always flickered at 2 a.m. Laura Voss had noticed that her first week working emergency intake in Millbrook Falls, Wyoming, and 3 years later, she still noticed it every night. She stood at the nurse's station, filling out medication logs while the waiting room buzzed with the usual chaos. A kid with a broken arm, someone's grandfather having chest pains, a college student who'd mixed the wrong pills at a party. Saturday nights always brought the same parade of bad decisions and worse luck. "Voss, we've got incoming." Laura looked up. Tim Rivera, one of the ER techs, was pointing toward the ambulance bay where red and blue lights were already painting the walls. She grabbed a clipboard and pushed through the doors into the cold March air. 2 patrol cars flanked an ambulance. The back doors were already open, but nobody was moving. "What's the delay?" Laura called out. Sergeant David Halstead stepped into the light, mid-40s, thick neck, the kind of cop who wore his badge like it made him royalty. Laura had seen him before, usually dragging in someone who'd resisted arrest a little too enthusiastically for the injuries to match the story. "No delay," Halstead said. "We're just getting him processed." Laura walked closer. Inside the ambulance, a man lay strapped to a backboard, hands cuffed behind him, despite being obviously unconscious. Blood had dried across his temple. His breathing was shallow, irregular. "Processed?" Laura kept her voice level. "He needs treatment." "He needs a cell," Halstead shot back. "He assaulted an officer." Laura looked at the man again. Mid-30s, wearing clothes that had been clean once. No shoes. The way his head lolled to the side wasn't right. "Who treated him at the scene?" "Nobody treated him." Halstead crossed his arms. "He got combative, we restrained him, now he's your problem." "He's unconscious." "Yeah, well, that happens when you fight cops." Laura's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd learned a long time ago that showing emotion to men like Halstead only gave them ammunition. "I need his vitals before he comes inside," she said, "and someone needs to uncuff him." Halstead laughed. Actually laughed. "You want me to uncuff a suspect so he can wake up and attack my officers inside a hospital? I want you to uncuff a patient so I can assess whether he's got a brain bleed." Laura stepped closer to the ambulance. "How hard did he hit his head?" "Hard enough to learn a lesson." The other officers chuckled. Laura ignored them and reached for the man's wrist, checking his pulse. Weak, fast, wrong. "His pressure's dropping," she said. "He needs imaging." "He needs a guard," Halstead corrected. "Which I'm providing. Now step aside and let us do our job." Laura didn't move. "Your job ended when he lost consciousness. Now he's a medical patient and hospital protocol says—" "I don't give a damn what hospital protocol says." Halstead moved into her space, close enough that she could smell coffee on his breath. "You're a nurse. Stay in your lane." Something flickered behind Laura's eyes, something cold and distant that Halstead was too arrogant to recognize. "My lane," she said quietly, "is keeping people alive. What's yours?" For a second, Halstead looked like he might grab her. His hand actually twitched toward her arm. But then Dr. Raymond Kemp appeared in the doorway behind them. "Problem out here?" Kemp was senior staff, the kind of doctor who'd spent 30 years perfecting the art of looking concerned while doing absolutely nothing. He glanced between Laura and Halstead like a parent interrupting squabbling children. "No problem," Halstead said smoothly. "Just explaining procedures to Nurse Voss." Laura turned. "This patient needs immediate evaluation. Possible head trauma, declining vitals, and he's been cuffed while unconscious for—" She checked her watch. "At least 20 minutes based on the ambulance response time." Kemp looked at the unconscious man, then at Halstead, then back at Laura. "Sergeant Halstead's office has been very cooperative with the hospital," Kemp said carefully. I'm sure they've followed appropriate protocols. Laura stared at him. He's not breathing right. Then we'll monitor him. Kemp gestured to the paramedics. Bring him in, gentlemen. Nurse Voss, please prepare Bay 3. Bay 3 is for stable patients, Laura said. He needs trauma. Bay 3, Kemp repeated. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. Laura watched them wheel the man inside, still cuffed, still untreated, still dying by degrees, while everyone pretended procedure mattered more than reality. She followed them in. The man, his paperwork said his name was Eric Brennan, no fixed address, was transferred to a hospital bed while Halstead planted himself in a chair by the door like he was guarding a terrorist. Laura started the assessment anyway. Pupil response, sluggish. Blood pressure, 90/60 and falling. Respiratory rate, 16 and shallow. She called for oxygen and started an IV line while Halstead watched with unconcealed irritation. You always this pushy? He asked. Laura didn't look up. You always this careless with human lives? Careful. Halstead's voice dropped. You're talking to a police sergeant. You're sitting in my ER. Laura finished securing the IV and reached for the blood pressure cuff. Different rules. She almost said more, almost told him exactly how many rules he'd already broken tonight. But then Eric Brennan's monitor started beeping, a sound Laura had heard too many times, in too many places that officially didn't exist. His pressure was crashing. I need imaging now, Laura called toward the hallway. Possible intracranial bleed. Kemp appeared again, moving with the urgency of someone trying to avoid paperwork. What happened? He's decompensating. We need CT. Kemp looked at Halstead. The sergeant shrugged. Could be drugs, Halstead offered. Guy's homeless, probably high on something. Laura's hands never stopped moving, adjusting the oxygen flow, checking the IV line, monitoring the readouts. But her voice went very quiet. If you'd let me treat him 30 minutes ago, we'd already know what's wrong. Don't put this on me, Halstead snapped. I brought him here, didn't I? You brought him here unconscious, restrained, and declining. That's not treatment. That's dumping a problem. Halstead stood up fast enough that his chair scraped across the floor. Listen, sweetheart. Bay 3 now. Dr. Kemp's voice cut through the tension. He was looking at Laura, not Halstead. Nurse Voss, I'll handle the patient. You're needed at the intake desk. Laura's eyes narrowed. I'm in the middle of the desk, now. It wasn't a request. Laura looked at Eric Brennan's monitor one more time, then at Kemp, then at Halstead, who was smirking like he'd won something. She walked out without another word. But she didn't go to the intake desk. She went to the staff lounge, pulled out her phone, and sent a single text message to a number she hadn't used in 2 years. Need patient advocate, Redfield General, police custody case, declining treatment. The response came back in seconds. On it. Laura deleted both messages and went back to work. The next 4 hours passed in the usual blur of chaos. A car accident brought in 2 teenagers with broken bones. An elderly woman fell in her bathroom. Someone's appendix decided 4 a.m. was a great time to rupture. Laura moved through it all with the same calm efficiency she always showed, taking vitals, starting IVs, holding hands when patients were scared, explaining procedures in language people could understand. Nobody watching her would have guessed she was furious. But Tim Rivera knew her well enough to notice. He caught up with her near the medication dispensary. You okay? Fine. You don't look fine. You look like you're planning a murder. Laura almost smiled. Halstead still here? Yeah. Kemp let him camp in Bay 3. The homeless guy's getting CT now, but Halstead insists on keeping him cuffed. Tim lowered his voice. What's going on? Same thing that's always going on. Laura pulled medication from the dispensary and signed the log. Cops bring someone in, hospital administration kisses their ass, patient gets whatever's left over. You can't fight the whole system, Voss. Watch me. Tim grabbed her arm gently. I'm serious. Halstead's got friends. Kemp's terrified of bad publicity. If you push this, Mama. Then what? Laura pulled her arm free, but not unkindly. They fire me? Wouldn't be the first time I got forced out for doing the right thing. Before Tim could respond, the CT tech came running down the hallway. Where's Dr. Kemp? Suture room. Why? The homeless guy, Brennan, he's got a subdural hematoma. It's expanding. Laura's stomach dropped. How bad? Bad enough he needs surgery 10 minutes ago. She didn't wait for permission. She went straight to the suture room where Kemp was stitching up one of the teenagers from the car accident. Brennan needs immediate surgical intervention, she said. Subdural hematoma. Kemp didn't look up from his stitching. Contact the on-call surgeon. I already did. She's coming from home, but it'll be 30 minutes minimum. Then we wait 30 minutes. He doesn't have 30 minutes. Laura stepped closer. He needs a burr hole evacuation now, or he's going to herniate. Kemp finally looked up. Are you questioning my medical judgment? I'm telling you what the scan shows. You're not a radiologist. No, but I've seen enough head trauma to know. Enough! Kemp put down his instruments. Nurse Voss, you've been insubordinate all night. First you argued with Sergeant Halstead, then you ignored my direct orders, and now you're trying to override my medical decisions. I've been patient, but this ends now. Laura felt the entire room watching her. The teenager on the table, the other nurse assisting Kemp, Tim Rivera in the doorway. A man is dying, she said quietly. A man in police custody is receiving appropriate care. Kemp's voice was cold. And you're suspended pending review. Security will escort you out. The words landed like a physical blow. Laura stood there for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. You're serious? Completely. Give your badge to security and collect your personal items. You're done for the night. Kemp, think about what I said you're done. Laura looked at Tim, who wouldn't meet her eyes. Looked at the teenager on the table, who was staring at her like she'd just sprouted horns. Looked back at Kemp, who'd already returned to his stitching like she'd ceased to exist. She unclipped her ID badge and set it on the counter. For the record, she said, when Eric Brennan dies because you were too afraid to challenge a cop's ego, that's on you. Get out, Kemp said. Laura walked. Security met her at the staff lounge, a young guy named Marcus who looked embarrassed about the whole thing. He waited while she collected her bag, her jacket, a book she'd been reading during breaks. I'm sorry about this, Marcus mumbled. Not your fault. For what it's worth, I think you were right. Laura looked at him. Then why isn't anyone backing me up? Marcus didn't have an answer for that. They walked through the ER together, past the nurses' station where her coworkers suddenly found their paperwork fascinating, past the waiting room where patients tracked her movement with confused eyes, past Bay 3 where Sergeant Halstead saw her coming and actually smiled. Enjoy unemployment, he called out. Laura stopped, turned, looked at him with an expression that made his smile falter just slightly. You should hope I stay unemployed, she said, because if I ever get my job back, the first thing I'm doing is filing a formal complaint about your conduct tonight. Good luck with that. Halstead leaned back in his chair. Nobody's going to take the word of a fired nurse over a decorated officer. Laura held his gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. We'll see. Marcus walked her all the way to the parking lot. The night air was cold enough to hurt, but Laura barely felt it. She stood next to her car, a 10-year-old Honda that had seen better days, and looked back at the hospital. 3 years of her life in that building. 3 years of saving lives, fighting bureaucracy, watching good people get crushed by systems that valued money over medicine. And now she was on the outside looking in while a man died because she'd made someone uncomfortable. Laura got in her car and drove home through empty streets. She lived in a small apartment on the edge of Millbrook Falls, the kind of place where nothing ever happened and everyone pretended to like it that way. She made coffee she didn't drink, sat on her couch, stared at the wall. Her phone buzzed. Patient advocate confirmed. Attorney en route. How bad is the situation? Laura typed back. Worse than I thought. They suspended me. Perfect. That's actionable. I don't want action. I want the patient to survive. Sometimes you can't have both. Laura put the phone down and closed her eyes. She must have dozed off because the sound of sirens jolted her awake. Close. Multiple vehicles, all screaming through the night like the world was ending. Laura checked her phone. 6:47 a.m. She'd been asleep for maybe 40 minutes. The sirens kept coming. More of them now. Ambulances, fire trucks, something else she couldn't identify. She went to her window and looked out over Millbrook Falls. The sky was still dark, but to the east near the industrial district, orange light flickered against the clouds. Her phone rang. Tim Rivera. Turn on the news, he said without preamble. Laura grabbed the remote. Every channel was showing the same thing, aerial footage of a massive fire at the Millbrook Falls chemical plant. Flames reaching into the sky, explosions sending debris across Highway 89, emergency crews swarming. How bad? Laura asked. Bad. The plant processes industrial solvents. Something went wrong with the storage tanks, and the whole facility went up. There's toxic smoke, secondary explosions, and Tim's voice caught. Laura, There are workers trapped inside. They're saying maybe 30 people. Laura's training kicked in before her brain could catch up. How many hospitals? We're the only level 2 trauma center within 60 miles. Everything's coming to us. What's the capacity? We've got maybe 6 beds open in the ER. ICU is full. Surgery's running 2 cases already. Laura's mind raced through the math. 30 victims, chemical exposure, burn trauma, smoke inhalation, crush injuries. You couldn't handle that with 6 beds and a skeleton crew. They need to set up field triage, she said, outside the ER. Separate the walking wounded from critical cases. Get respiratory therapy ready for intubations. Call in every off-duty surgeon within. Laura, you're suspended. The words hit like cold water. Right. She wasn't part of this anymore. Call Dr. Kemp, she said. Tell him everything I just said. I can't. He's in surgery. The on-call surgeon showed up, and they're doing the craniotomy on Brennan. Then call the nursing supervisor. Call someone. I'm calling you. Tim's voice was tight. Because in about 10 minutes, this place is going to turn into a war zone, and the only person I know with actual mass casualty experience just got fired. Laura stood there with the phone pressed to her ear, watching the news footage of flames reaching into the sky. 30 people. Maybe more. Chemical burns that would destroy lungs and skin. Trauma that would overwhelm every system Redfield General had. I can't come back, she said. Kemp made it clear. Screw Kemp, people are going to die if we don't get organized, and you're the only one who knows how to run this kind of response. Tim, please. Laura looked at her badge sitting on the coffee table where she'd thrown it, looked at the news, looked at her hands, which had started shaking without her permission. I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said. She hung up, grabbed her badge, and ran for the door. Welcome. The hospital parking lot was already chaos. Ambulances were arriving faster than the ER could process them. Paramedics were shouting, patients were screaming. Someone had set up temporary lighting, but it only made the shadows worse. Laura pushed through the crowd and found Tim at the entrance. Where do you need me? Everywhere. He thrust a tablet into her hands. We've got 11 critical patients incoming, 4 already coding, and nobody knows where to put anyone. Laura scanned the tablet. The information was a mess. Incomplete names, vague injuries, no clear organization. This won't work, she said. We need triage tags, not tablet entries. We don't have triage tags. Then we make them. Laura grabbed a box of colored wristbands from the supply cart. Red for immediate, yellow for delayed, green for minor, black for expectant. Tim, get me 2 nurses and clear the ambulance bay. We're doing primary triage outside before anyone comes through those doors. Laura, I can't authorize. I don't care about authorization. Laura was already moving. You want this disaster managed or not? Tim nodded and ran. Laura stepped into the ambulance bay just as the first wave hit. 3 ambulances arrived simultaneously, disgorging patients faster than the system could handle. Burn victims with skin hanging off in sheets. Someone missing an arm. A teenager choking on chemical smoke. The ER staff froze. Laura could see it happening, that moment when training collides with reality and people's brains just stop processing. Listen up. Laura's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. I need everyone to stop, breathe, and follow my lead. We're doing this by the numbers. A nurse Laura didn't recognize turned to her. Who the hell are you? Someone who's done this before. Laura pointed at the burn victim. Red tag, straight to trauma bay 1. You... She grabbed another nurse. Green tag, walking wounded to the cafeteria. You, yellow tag, stable but urgent, line them up in the hallway. We can't just... Yes, we can. Move! Something in Laura's voice, some quality that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with absolute certainty, made people obey. The nurses started moving. The patients started flowing. The system started working. Laura moved between arriving ambulances like she was conducting an orchestra. Red, yellow, green, black. Each patient assessed in seconds, tagged, directed. More ambulances arrived, then more. The ER filled, the hallways filled, the cafeteria filled. And Laura was everywhere at once, coordinating respiratory therapy, directing surgeons, setting up makeshift treatment areas, keeping people alive through sheer force of will and experience earned in places she'd never be allowed to talk about. Dr. Kemp appeared in the hallway, still in surgical scrubs, staring at the organized chaos with confusion. What's going on? Who authorized? He saw Laura and stopped mid-sentence. You're supposed to be suspended. Laura didn't even look at him. She was putting in a chest tube on a patient who was drowning in his own blood. Suspend me later, she said. Right now you need me. Kemp opened his mouth. closed it, looked around at the functioning disaster response, made a decision. Fine, but we're talking about this. Great. Get me 6 units of O negative and find out where the hell the burn surgeon is. Kemp actually went to find the blood. Tim appeared at Laura's shoulder. You're a goddamn miracle worker. You know that? I'm just doing the job. Laura finished the chest tube and moved to the next patient. How many more incoming? At least 15, maybe more. We're going to run out of space. We're already out of space. Laura looked around the packed ER. Every bed was full. The hallways were lined with patients. They'd turned the waiting room into a treatment area and the cafeteria into a minor injury clinic, and they still had 15 more coming. We need to expand outside, Laura said. Set up a field hospital in the parking lot. Get facilities to bring tents, tables, lighting, contact other hospitals for transfer coordination, and someone needs to call the state emergency management office because this just became a mass casualty incident. Tim stared at her. You want me to call the state? Yes. I'm an ER tech, Laura. I can't just... Then I'll do it. Laura pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, a new sound cut through the chaos. Helicopters. Not medical helicopters. Something heavier. Military. Everyone in the ER stopped and looked up. Through the windows, Laura could see them descending. 3 Blackhawks, running lights cutting through the smoke-stained dawn. They were landing in the hospital parking lot, rotor wash scattering debris everywhere. What the hell? Tim whispered. The helicopters touched down. Doors open. Tactical medics in military uniforms poured out carrying equipment Laura hadn't seen since her deployment. Portable surgical units, advanced life support kits, field blood banks. And then someone else stepped out of the lead helicopter. Colonel Marcus Reeves, United States Air Force Medical Corps. He was looking directly at the hospital, directly at Laura. Sergeant Halstead, who'd been hovering near Bay 3 all morning, pushed his way through the crowd. This is a civilian hospital, he shouted toward the parking lot. You can't just land military aircraft here without... Colonel Reeves ignored him completely. He walked straight past Halstead, through the automatic doors, into the ER. His eyes found Laura immediately. Then, in front of 24 hospital staff, 15 patients, and 1 very confused police sergeant, Colonel Marcus Reeves came to attention and saluted. Major Voss, he said formally, Rapid Response Unit reporting for deployment, awaiting your orders. The entire emergency room went silent. Tim Rivera's tablet slipped from his hands and clattered on the floor. Dr. Kemp's face went white. Sergeant Halstead looked like someone had just punched him in the stomach, because Laura Voss, the quiet nurse they'd suspended, dismissed, and underestimated, wasn't just a nurse at all. She was a decorated Air Force trauma surgeon who'd run combat surgical teams in 3 war zones, commanded field hospitals under enemy fire, and held the military rank to coordinate federal emergency medical responses on American soil. And she'd just been activated. Laura looked at Colonel Reeves, looked at the tactical medics setting up equipment in the parking lot, looked at the shocked faces surrounding her. Status report, she said calmly. Reeves lowered his salute. We have 2 mobile surgical units, 4 critical care teams, and a field blood bank. Transport helicopters are inbound with additional supplies. We can establish a level 3 trauma capability within 30 minutes. Do it. Coordinate with hospital administration for patient transfers. Priority is chemical exposure and burn trauma. Laura turned to the stunned staff. Everyone who is working with me continues current assignments. Military medical will handle overflow and critical cases. Questions? Nobody spoke. They were all still staring. Laura raised her voice slightly. I said, questions? Dr. Kemp finally found his tongue. You're military? In active reserve, Laura said, but federal law allows activation during civilian mass casualty events, which this is. She looked around the room. So unless someone has a medical question, I suggest we get back to saving lives. People started moving again, slowly at first, then faster, as the reality sank in. Tim picked up his tablet with shaking hands. You could have mentioned this. Would it have changed anything? Laura asked. It would have changed everything. Exactly. Laura turned back to Colonel Reeves. What else do I need to know? Federal investigators are en route, Reeves said quietly. When I activated your command authorization, it triggered automatic review protocols. They'll want to know why a suspended nurse needed emergency military intervention. Laura glanced toward Bay 3, where Sergeant Halstead was standing very still, his face unreadable. Let them investigate, she said. I've got nothing to hide. Reeves followed her gaze. The patient in police custody, Brennan, he's going to survive. The surgery was successful. Good. But the sergeant's report claims Brennan attacked him without provocation, claims he had no choice but to use force. Laura's expression didn't change. That's his story. What's yours? Mine is in the medical records. Brennan's injuries, the delayed treatment, the suspension when I questioned procedures. Laura looked directly at Reeves. And mine has evidence. Something shifted in Reeves' eyes. Major Voss, if you're alleging misconduct, I'm not alleging anything. I'm stating facts. What investigators do with those facts is their business. Understood. Reeves hesitated. For what it's worth, the activation paperwork shows this hospital suspended you approximately 6 hours before requesting federal medical assistance. That's going to raise questions. Good, Laura said. I hope it raises a lot of questions. Before Reeves could respond, a new commotion erupted outside. More vehicles were arriving, not ambulances this time, but unmarked SUVs with government plates. Federal investigators, right on schedule. And walking through the door behind them, looking absolutely terrified, was Hospital Administrator Patricia Werner. She saw Laura, saw the military presence, saw her entire career hanging by a thread, and made the only choice she could. Major Voss, Werner said in a voice that shook slightly, I think we need to talk about your suspension. Laura looked at her for a long moment, looked at Dr. Kemp, hovering behind her, looked at Sergeant Halstead, who'd gone very pale. Later, Laura said. Right now I have patients to save. She walked past Werner without another word and headed back to the treatment area where someone was coding. Behind her, she could hear Werner trying to explain things to the federal investigators. Ahead of her, she could see the organized chaos of the disaster response. Military medics working alongside civilian nurses, patients being saved who would have died an hour ago, a system functioning because someone finally had the courage to do what was right instead of what was easy. And for the first time in 6 hours, Laura Voss smiled, because the people who'd tried to silence her had just given her the loudest voice in the room. The coding patient was a 42-year-old man named Dennis Howell, who'd been working maintenance when the chemical tanks exploded. His lungs were filling with fluid faster than the ventilator could compensate, his oxygen saturation dropping into the 70s despite maximum support. Laura's hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting the vent settings, pushing medications, watching the monitor like it held the secrets of the universe. Around her, the military medics worked in synchronized silence, anticipating her needs before she voiced them. Propofol's in, one of them reported. Paralytic? Ready when you are? Laura checked the airway pressure, still climbing. The chemical exposure had turned Howell's lungs into something closer to concrete than tissue, and they were running out of options fast. We need to prone him, she said. Flip him face down, let gravity work for us instead of against us. It took 6 people to safely turn a critically ill patient on a ventilator. They managed it in 90 seconds, a minor miracle considering half the team had met each other 15 minutes ago. Howell's oxygen saturation crept upward. 82, 85, 88. Laura exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. Behind her, she could hear Administrator Werner's voice rising in pitch as she tried to explain to the federal investigators why the hospital had suspended its most qualified emergency responders 6 hours before a mass casualty event. The conversation wasn't going well. Major Voss was insubordinate, Werner was saying. She directly challenged a police sergeant and refused to follow Dr. Kemp's medical directives. Because the directives were wrong. That was a new voice, female, authoritative, cutting through Werner's excuses like a scalpel. I've reviewed the medical records for patient Eric Brennan. There's a 4-hour gap between initial presentation and surgical intervention for a confirmed subdural hematoma. In what universe is that appropriate care? Laura glanced over her shoulder. The woman speaking was maybe 50, wearing a dark suit and the kind of expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse administrators could manufacture and wasn't impressed by any of them. Werner's face had gone red. We were following established protocols for patients in police custody. Protocols don't override medical necessity. The woman pulled out a tablet. I'm Special Agent Karen Dutton, Department of Health and Human Services. I handle federal oversight of medical facilities receiving Medicare funding, which this hospital does, to the tune of roughly $40 million annually. Werner went pale. I don't see what that has to do with... It means I can recommend pulling every penny of that funding if I find evidence of systematic denial of care. Dutton's eyes were cold. And right now, I'm finding a lot of evidence. Dr. Kemp appeared from somewhere, still wearing surgical scrubs spattered with Eric Brennan's blood. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the past 6 hours. Agent Dutton, I think there's been a misunderstanding, he started. No misunderstanding, doctor. You suspended a qualified trauma surgeon for advocating proper patient care. Then, when a mass casualty event occurred, you needed that same surgeon to prevent your ER from collapsing into complete chaos. Does that about cover it? Kemp's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Dutton turned to Laura. Major Voss, I'd like your statement when you have a moment. I'm in the middle of... I can see that. Take your time, I'll be here all day. Dutton's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. So will my team. We're conducting a full facility review. She walked away, leaving Werner and Kemp standing in the hallway looking like they'd just watched their careers catch fire. Tim appeared at Laura's elbow. Is it wrong that I'm enjoying this? Probably. Laura checked Howell's vitals again. Stable, finally. But I'm not judging. The military guys are asking where you want the mobile surgical unit set up. Parking lot west side, away from the active ambulance lanes. Laura pulled off her gloves. And tell them we need the blood bank operational immediately. We're going through units faster than the hospital supply can handle. Tim nodded and disappeared. Laura turned to find Colonel Reeves watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something wrong? Just thinking, Reeves said, about how many times I've seen you work miracles in worse conditions than this. This isn't a miracle. It's just organized chaos. Same thing, depending on who's doing the organizing. Reeves glanced toward where Werner and Kemp were still standing in shock. They're going to fight back, you know. People like that always do. Let them. Laura Major Voss! One of the nurses was waving frantically from Trauma Bay 2. We've got a pediatric patient, chemical burns, airway compromise. Laura was moving before the sentence finished. The patient was a girl, maybe 7 years old, whose father worked at the chemical plant and had brought her to visit that morning. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong everything. The burns covered 40% of her body. Her breathing sounded like gravel grinding in a tin can. I need a pediatric intubation kit and burn protocols, Laura said. The words came automatically. Muscle memory from too many children saved and too many lost. Someone call respiratory therapy and get me the parents. Her father's dead, the nurse said quietly. He was in the control room when it exploded. Her mother's in the waiting room. Laura closed her eyes for half a second, opened them, kept working. The intubation went smoothly. If anything about putting a breathing tube into a burned child could be called smooth, Laura's hands didn't shake. They never shook, no matter how badly she wanted them to. She's stable, Laura told the nurse. For now, get her to the burn unit and make sure someone stays with the mother. We don't have enough staff to... Then pull someone from administration. Those people aren't doing anything useful anyway. The nurse actually smiled. Yes, ma'am. Laura stepped out of the trauma bay and nearly collided with Sergeant Halstead. He'd been standing just outside watching through the window, and the expression on his face was something between anger and fear. Can I help you? Laura asked. Halstead's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. Finally, you never mentioned you were military. You never asked. That's not an answer. Laura looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man whose entire world had just shifted sideways. He'd spent years being the biggest authority in any room he entered, and now he'd discovered that the woman he'd dismissed as a pushy nurse outranked him in ways that actually mattered. I don't owe you an answer, Laura said, or an explanation. What I owe is appropriate medical care to every patient who comes through those doors, including the ones you bring in. Eric Brennan attacked me. Eric Brennan has a witness who says otherwise. Halstead's face went white. What witness? The paramedic who responded to your call, the one you told to wait in the ambulance while you secured the scene. He had a body camera running the entire time. Laura's voice was perfectly calm, perfectly professional. Federal investigators have the footage now. You're lying. Am I? Laura stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen, Sergeant. Those investigators are going to review everything. Brennan's medical records, the delayed treatment, your incident report, the security footage from the hospital, and yes, the body camera video you didn't know existed. And then they're going to ask you questions. A lot of questions. Halstead's hands curled into fists. You think you're so smart. I think I'm good at my job, which is more than I can say for you. For a moment, Laura thought he might actually hit her. His whole body tensed, his face flushed red, and something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. But then Agent Dutton appeared in the hallway, flanked by 2 other federal investigators, and Halstead's survival instincts kicked in just enough to stop him from doing something truly stupid. Sergeant Halstead, Dutton said pleasantly, do you have a few minutes? We'd like to discuss your report regarding Eric Brennan. Halstead looked at Laura one more time. Then he turned and followed the investigators down the hallway like a man walking to his own execution. Tim materialized beside Laura. Please tell me there really is body camera footage. There is. And it shows what you said? It shows Brennan asking for medical help, and Halstead punching him in the head hard enough to cause a brain bleed. Laura's voice was flat. Then it shows Halstead telling the paramedic to record it as suspect became combative during arrest. Jesus. Yeah. How did you know about the footage? Laura pulled out her phone and showed him the text message from earlier, the one she'd sent to a number Tim didn't recognize. Patient advocate, former military lawyer who now works civilian cases. She pulled the body cam records through a federal information request about 30 seconds after I contacted her. Tim stared at her. You set this whole thing up. I documented a pattern of misconduct and made sure the right people had access to the evidence. Laura pocketed her phone. That's not setting anything up. That's just doing my job. Your job is medicine. My job is protecting patients. Sometimes that means IVs and intubations. Sometimes it means making sure the people who hurt them face consequences. Before Tim could respond, the radio on his belt squawked. All available staff to the ambulance bay. We've got incoming critical, driver trapped in overturned fuel truck, crush injuries, possible internal bleeding. Laura and Tim ran. The fuel truck driver was a man named Robert Kasich, who'd been hauling industrial solvent away from the chemical plant when the explosion sent debris across the highway. His truck had flipped 3 times before crashing into a concrete barrier, and the dashboard had crushed his pelvis like an aluminum can. He was awake, screaming, dying. Get me cross-matched blood, 4 units, start 2 large-bore IVs, and someone call surgery, Laura ordered. Pelvis is unstable, he's bleeding into his abdomen, and we need to move fast. The military medics were already working, cutting away clothing, establishing access, running fluids. Laura did a quick ultrasound and swore under her breath. Free fluid in the abdomen, lots of it. He needs an OR now. Surgery's backed up, one of the nurses reported. Both trauma bays are full. Then we do it here. Laura looked at Colonel Reeves. Can your mobile unit handle an exploratory laparotomy? Reeves didn't hesitate. We can handle anything you need. They moved Kasich to the mobile surgical unit in the parking lot, a prefabricated structure that had been assembled in under 20 minutes and looked like something from a science fiction movie. Inside, it had everything Laura needed: lights, monitors, instruments, and most importantly, space to work without the hospital administration breathing down her neck. Laura scrubbed in while the anesthesiologist put Kasich under. The surgery was brutal, hours of clamping bleeders, repairing torn vessels, stabilizing a shattered pelvis with external fixation that would make Kasich's life miserable for months, but at least give him a life to be miserable in. She was wrist-deep in his abdomen when Administrator Werner appeared in the doorway of the surgical unit. Major Voss, we need to talk. Laura didn't look up. I'm in the middle of surgery. This can't wait. Yes, it can. Laura tied off a bleeder and reached for the suction. Unless you're planning to scrub in and help, I suggest you wait outside. Werner's voice went sharp. I'm still the administrator of this hospital, and I'm still trying to save a man's life, which takes priority. Werner stood there for another few seconds, then turned and left. Laura could hear her heels clicking angrily across the pavement outside. She's going to make your life hell, the anesthesiologist murmured. She already tried that. Didn't take. Laura inspected the surgical field. The bleeding had slowed. Kasich's pressure was climbing. Let's close him up and get him to intensive care. The rest of the surgery went smoothly, or as smoothly as anything involving a crushed pelvis and multiple liters of blood loss could go. By the time Laura stripped off her surgical gown, the sun had fully risen and Millbrook Falls looked different in daylight. The chemical plant was still burning in the distance, black smoke staining the sky. Emergency crews swarmed the wreckage, and all around Redfield General, the organized chaos of the disaster response continued. Laura found Agent Dutton in the hospital cafeteria, which had been converted into a command center. Whiteboards covered the walls, tracking patient status, resource allocation, and coordination with other facilities. Major Voss, Dutton gestured to a chair. Sit. You look like you're about to collapse. Laura sat. Someone handed her coffee that tasted like battery acid but contained caffeine, which was all that mattered. I need your formal statement, Dutton said. Everything that happened with Eric Brennan, your suspension, and the events leading to federal activation. Laura told her. All of it. The delayed treatment, Halstead's conduct, Kemp's refusal to intervene, Werner's decision to suspend her rather than challenge police authority. Dutton took notes on a tablet, her expression growing darker with each detail. How long has this been going on? She asked when Laura finished. Define this. The pattern. Hospital administration deferring to police even when it compromises patient care. Laura thought about all the times she'd seen it happen. Patients in custody getting substandard treatment, complaints ignored, staff intimidated into silence. Years, she said finally. Maybe longer. I've only been here 3 years, but the culture was already established when I arrived. And you never reported it? To who? Hospital administration was part of the problem. Local police were the other half. You file a complaint, and it goes nowhere except into your personnel file as evidence you're difficult to work with. Dutton nodded like she'd heard this story 1,000 times before. What changed? I got suspended for trying to save someone's life. Laura met her eyes. And I decided I was done being quiet. Good. Dutton closed her tablet. Because we're building a federal case, and your testimony is going to be crucial. Against who? Everyone. Dutton's smile was cold. Halstead for excessive force and denial of medical care, Kemp for medical malpractice, Werner for administrative negligence. And that's just the start. We're going to dig into every complaint, every incident report, every suspicious injury that came through this ER in the past 5 years. Laura felt something twist in her chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. You think you can actually make charges stick? I think when we're done investigating, Sergeant Halstead is going to prison, Dr. Kemp is going to lose his medical license, and Administrator Werner is going to spend the rest of her career answering questions and depositions. Dutton leaned forward. But I need you to be willing to testify, publicly, under oath, against powerful people who will do everything they can to destroy your credibility. Laura didn't hesitate. When do we start? The door to the cafeteria burst open. Tim practically fell through it, his face white. Laura, we have a problem. She was on her feet instantly. What kind of problem? The kind where Sergeant Halstead just went into Bay 3 and told Eric Brennan that if he talks to federal investigators, Halstead will make sure charges get filed that send him to prison for 20 years. Laura's vision went red around the edges. He what? There's more. Tim's voice shook. Brennan's terrified. He's saying he won't cooperate, won't give a statement. Halstead's threatening to charge him with assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and about 6 other things unless Brennan backs up Halstead's version of events. Agent Dutton was already moving. Where's Halstead now? Still in Bay 3. Show me. They ran through the hallway. Laura, Dutton, and 2 other federal investigators who appeared from nowhere. By the time they reached Bay 3, a small crowd had gathered outside. Through the window, Laura could see Halstead leaning over Eric Brennan's bed, speaking in a low voice that didn't carry, but didn't need to. The message was clear in his posture, in the way Brennan had shrunk back against the pillows, in the fear written across Brennan's face. Dutton pushed through the door without knocking. Sergeant Halstead, step away from the patient. Halstead turned slowly. I'm conducting official police business. You're intimidating a witness in a federal investigation. Dutton gestured to the other investigators. Escort the sergeant out of this hospital. If he resists, arrest him for obstruction. Halstead's face went through several colors before settling on something close to purple. You can't do that. I absolutely can. And unless you want to test exactly how much authority I have right now, I suggest you leave voluntarily. For a long moment, Halstead didn't move. He looked at Laura, at Dutton, at the investigators flanking the door. Then he looked at Eric Brennan, who was staring at him with something that might have been terror, or might have been the first sparks of courage. This isn't over, Halstead said. You're right, Dutton replied. It's just getting started. Halstead walked out. The investigators followed him. The door closed. Laura approached Brennan's bed slowly, keeping her movements careful and non-threatening. He looked worse than he had the night before. The surgery had saved his life, but left him with a shaved head, surgical staples, and the hollow-eyed expression of someone who'd stared into the abyss and barely made it back. Mr. Brennan, she said quietly. I'm Major Laura Voss. We met briefly last night. You're the nurse who tried to help me. I'm the nurse who did help you. You're alive because we got you into surgery. Laura pulled up a chair. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you afraid of Sergeant Halstead? Brennan laughed, a broken sound with no humor in it. I'm homeless. I've got no money, no lawyer, no family. Yeah, I'm afraid. I've seen what cops like him do to people like me. File charges, stack lies, throw us in cells until we disappear. That's not going to happen this time. How do you know? Because I have evidence, video evidence, and federal investigators who actually care about the truth. Laura leaned forward. But I need you to be willing to tell your story. What really happened when Halstead arrested you? Brennan's hands twisted in the hospital blanket. He said I attacked him. Did you? No. The word came out barely above a whisper. I asked him for help, told him I was dizzy, thought I was having a stroke or something. He told me to stop faking. When I tried to walk toward the hospital on my own, he grabbed me, threw me on the ground. I hit my head on the curb, and everything went dark. Laura pulled out her phone and started recording. Say that again, for the record. Brennan did. Every word. And this time his voice was stronger. When he finished, Laura stopped the recording and sent it directly to Agent Dutton. What happens now? Brennan asked. Now you get better. And when you're strong enough, you give an official statement to federal investigators. After that, Laura stood up. After that, we make sure Halstead faces every consequence he's been avoiding for years. She left Bay 3 and found the hallway packed with people. Hospital staff, military medics, federal investigators, even a few patients who were mobile enough to stand. They were all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to admiration to fear. Tim pushed through the crowd. That was incredibly stupid or incredibly brave. I can't decide which. Probably both. Laura looked around at all the faces watching her. Anyone else got something to say? A young nurse Laura barely knew stepped forward. Her name tag read Jennifer Hayes. 3 months ago, Hayes said, her voice shaking, Sergeant Halstead came in with a suspect who had a dislocated shoulder. When I tried to treat it, Halstead told me the suspect was faking, ordered me to discharge him. I did what I was told because... She swallowed hard. Because I was afraid. Another voice spoke up, one of the ER techs. Last year I saw Halstead threaten a patient's family. Told them if they filed a complaint about rough treatment, he'd find reasons to arrest them. More voices joined in, a cascade of stories, complaints, incidents that had been buried under fear and administrative indifference. Laura listened to all of it. So did Agent Dutton, who was recording everything on her tablet. When the last person finished speaking, Dutton looked around the hallway. Anyone who wants to make an official statement, come find me. Anyone who's been threatened, intimidated, or witnessed misconduct, I want to hear from you. She paused. This stops today. All of it. The crowd slowly dispersed, people returning to their jobs with the kind of energy that comes from finally being heard. Laura was heading back to check on her patients when Administrator Werner intercepted her in the hallway. We need to talk. Now. I'm busy. Make time. Werner's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. My office, 5 minutes. Laura followed her to the administrative wing, a part of the hospital that always felt disconnected from the actual work of medicine. Clean carpets, comfortable furniture, walls covered with photographs of important people shaking hands. Werner closed her office door and rounded on Laura immediately. Do you have any idea what you've done? Saved lives? Exposed corruption? Take your pick. You've destroyed this hospital's reputation. We'll lose funding, face lawsuits, potentially lose our accreditation. Good, Laura interrupted. Maybe you should have thought about that before you let police brutality happen in your emergency room. Werner's face went red. I protected this institution, made difficult decisions to maintain positive relationships with law enforcement. You enabled abuse, called it diplomacy, and when someone finally stood up to it, you suspended them to save your own ass. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Document misconduct? Refuse to be quiet while patients suffer? Laura stepped closer. You're right about one thing, Administrator. This hospital's reputation is destroyed, but not because I spoke up. Because you created a culture where speaking up got you punished. Werner's hands were shaking. You're fired, effective immediately. You can't fire me. I'm federal medical personnel on emergency activation status. Then as soon as my activation ends, I'll have about 50 federal investigators asking why you tried to terminate someone who exposed a pattern of civil rights violations in your facility. Laura's voice was cold. So go ahead. Fire me. See how that works out? Werner opened her mouth, closed it, sank into her desk chair like someone had cut her strings. Laura turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, she said quietly, this didn't have to happen. If you'd just listened when people brought you complaints, if you'd backed up your staff instead of backing down to bullies, if you'd chosen patience over politics even once, she shook her head. But you didn't, so now we all deal with the consequences. She left Werner sitting in her office and returned to the ER, where the disaster response was still running full speed. More patients arrived, more lives were saved. The system that had been on the verge of collapse that morning was now functioning with remarkable efficiency. Colonel Reeves found her around sunset. Patient count stabilizing, he reported. We've handled 48 casualties, transferred 12 to specialized burn centers, and lost 3. 3 deaths. Laura felt each one like a physical weight. Could we have saved them? No. Reeves' voice was firm. They were gone before they arrived. You did everything possible. Laura nodded, but didn't feel any better. There's something else, Reeves said. The federal investigators want to expand their scope. They're looking into other incidents involving Halstead going back 5 years. And they found something. What? A pattern. 12 different suspects brought to this ER with head injuries. All of them claimed Halstead used excessive force. All of their complaints were dismissed as false allegations. Laura felt sick. 12? That we know of. Could be more. Reeves handed her a file. They want you to review the medical records. See if there's documentation that supports the patient's claims versus Halstead's reports. Laura opened the file. The first case was a 23-year-old woman arrested for shoplifting. Halstead's report said she fell while resisting arrest. The medical photos showed injuries consistent with being punched in the face. The second case was worse. The third was worse still. By the time Laura finished reading, her hands were shaking. How did this go on for so long? She whispered. Same way it always does, Reeves said. People in power protecting each other, victims without resources, staff too afraid to speak up. He paused. Until someone finally refuses to stay quiet. Laura closed the file. I need to talk to these victims, the ones who survived. Already arranged. Agent Dutton's bringing them in tomorrow for interviews. Good. Laura looked toward Bay 3, where Eric Brennan was sleeping under the watch of a federal security detail. And Halstead, under investigation, officially suspended from duty pending the outcome. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing in the wreckage of something that should never have been broken in the first place. Laura worked through the rest of the night, treating patients, coordinating with military medical, reviewing case files until the words blurred together. By the time the sun rose again, she'd been awake for nearly 40 hours straight. Tim found her in the break room, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. You need to sleep. Can't. Too much to do. Laura, you're going to collapse. Then I'll collapse later. She stood up, swayed slightly, and caught herself on the table. How many patients still need? All the critical cases are stable. The military team can handle everything else. Tim physically steered her toward a cot that someone had set up in the corner. Sleep. That's an order. You can't order me. I outrank you. Then consider it a strong suggestion from someone who gives a damn whether you survive this. Laura wanted to argue, but her body was already shutting down, dragging her toward unconsciousness, whether she liked it or not. She lay down on the cot, closed her eyes. Sleep hit her like a freight train. When she woke up, the light outside had changed. Late afternoon, maybe early evening. She'd slept for hours without dreaming, without moving, without any awareness that the world had kept turning while she was gone. Laura sat up slowly, her body aching in places she'd forgotten existed. The break room door opened. Agent Dutton walked in, followed by 2 people Laura had never seen before, a man and a woman, both wearing suits that screamed federal authority. Major Voss, Dutton said, we need to talk, and you're going to want to sit down for this. Laura's stomach dropped. What happened? Sergeant Halstead is gone. The words didn't make sense at first. Gone where? We don't know. He left the police station 6 hours ago during a shift change, drove home, packed a bag, and disappeared. Dutton's expression was grim. We have a warrant for his arrest, but he's in the wind. Laura processed this. He ran. He ran! Which means he knows exactly how bad the evidence against him is. Dutton pulled out her tablet. But here's the problem. Before he disappeared, Halstead accessed police databases and pulled the personal information of everyone who's given statements against him, including you. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He has my address? Your address, phone number, vehicle registration, everything. Dutton looked directly at Laura. I'm recommending federal protective custody until we locate him. You think he's dangerous? I think he's a trained police officer who just lost everything and knows he's facing prison time. So yes, I think he's very dangerous. Laura's mind raced. Halstead on the run, armed, desperate, with access to the home addresses of everyone who'd testified against him. What about the other witnesses? She asked. Brennan, the hospital staff, the victims from previous cases. We're working on protective details for all of them. But Major Voss, you're the one who activated this entire investigation. If Halstead blames anyone, Dutton didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Laura stood up. I'm not hiding. This isn't about bravery. It's about basic safety. I spent 4 years in combat zones keeping people alive while being shot at. I'm not going into protective custody because one dirty cop is having a breakdown. Laura's voice was hard. But I will take precautions, and I want security posted on all the witnesses, especially Brennan. Dutton started to argue, then seemed to recognize the futility. At least let us assign you a security detail. Fine, but I'm not stopping my work. I wouldn't expect you to. Laura left the break room and returned to the ER, which was finally starting to feel less like a war zone. Most of the chemical plant victims had been stabilized, transferred, or discharged. The military medical team was packing up equipment. The normal rhythm of emergency medicine was reasserting itself. But something felt wrong. Laura couldn't name it, couldn't pin down the source of the unease crawling up her spine. She was checking on a patient when Tim appeared, moving fast. "Laura, we have a situation." "What kind?" "Eric Brennan's room. The federal security guard stepped away to use the bathroom 2 minutes ago. When he came back, Brennan was gone." Laura's blood went cold. "Gone where?" "Nobody knows. His IV's been pulled, he's wearing hospital clothes, and there's no sign of him anywhere in the building. Check the security footage." "Already on it." "But Laura..." Tim's face was white. "His room overlooks the parking lot, and there's a window that's been opened from the inside." Laura ran. Through the hallway, up the stairs, to Bay 3, where Eric Brennan had been recovering from brain surgery less than 12 hours ago. The window was indeed open, cold air pouring through, and on the floor, just beneath the windowsill, was a single spot of fresh blood. She leaned out the window and looked down. It was a 12-foot drop to the parking lot pavement. Survivable if you were desperate enough or scared enough or both. And there, barely visible in the fading light, was a trail of blood drops leading toward the street. Agent Dutton appeared beside her, breathing hard. She looked at the window, the blood, the empty room. "He ran," she said. "Brennan ran from protective custody." "Or he was taken," Laura countered. "That window's too high for someone post-surgery to jump safely. Someone helped him." "Who?" Laura didn't answer. She was already moving, following the blood trail out of the hospital, across the parking lot, toward the darkening streets of Millbrook Falls, where a terrified witness had just vanished and a dangerous fugitive was still out there somewhere, hunting the people who'd exposed him. The blood trail stopped at the edge of the hospital property, where asphalt met dirt and streetlights gave way to shadow. Laura crouched down, examining the last visible drops, still wet enough to reflect the orange glow from the sodium vapor lamps. "He didn't walk away from this on his own," she said. "Not 12 hours post-op with a craniotomy. Someone carried him or drove him." Agent Dutton was already on her phone, barking orders to someone on the other end. "I want street cameras pulled for a 6-block radius, hospital parking footage, everything." She paused, listening. "I don't care if it takes all night. A federal witness just disappeared and we need him found before..." She stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale in the dim light. "Before what?" Laura demanded. Dutton lowered the phone. "One of my agents just found something at Halstead's house. A list, handwritten, names, addresses, and times." "What kind of times?" "Shift schedules. When people leave work. When they're home alone." Dutton's voice was tight. "Your name's on there, Major Voss, top of the list, along with Eric Brennan and 4 other people who gave statements against him." Laura felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear exactly, but the kind of hyper-awareness that came with knowing someone was actively planning to hurt you. She'd felt it before, in places where the enemy wore uniforms you could identify. This was worse. The enemy here wore a badge and knew every street in Millbrook Falls better than she did. "Brennan's not safe," Laura said. "Wherever he went, Halstead will find him." "We don't know that Halstead has him. Who else would?" Brennan was terrified. He ran because someone made him more afraid of staying than jumping out a second-story window with fresh surgical staples in his skull. Laura stood up. "And there's only one person in this town who's been threatening him for the past 24 hours. Dutton's phone rang again. She answered, listened for 10 seconds, and her expression went from concerned to horrified. "Say that again." A pause. "You're certain?" Another pause. "Secure the scene. Nobody touches anything until I get there." She hung up and looked at Laura with eyes that had seen too much in a very short time. They found blood in Halstead's car. The vehicle was abandoned 3 blocks from here, keys still in the ignition, driver's door open, and there's blood on the passenger seat. Laura's mind raced through the implications. Halstead grabbed Brennan from the hospital, put him in the car, then abandoned the vehicle. Why? Because he needed a different car, one we wouldn't be looking for. Dutton was already moving back toward the hospital. He's switching vehicles, which means he's planning to run. But first he's tying up loose ends, Laura finished. Everyone on that list. They ran back through the hospital entrance. The ER had quieted down. Most of the disaster victims were either stable or transferred, leaving behind the usual trickle of weekend injuries and illnesses. It felt surreal, walking through the normal chaos of medicine while knowing somewhere in the dark a man with a gun was hunting witnesses. Colonel Reeves met them in the hallway, his military bearing somehow more pronounced than usual. "Major Voss, Agent Dutton, we have a problem." "Another one?" Laura asked. Jennifer Hayes, the nurse who testified about the dislocated shoulder case. She didn't show up for her shift tonight. Nobody's been able to reach her. Laura felt her stomach drop. Hayes lived alone in a small apartment on the north side of town. Young, idealistic, the kind of person who'd spent 3 months carrying guilt about not speaking up and had finally found the courage to tell the truth. "Send someone to her apartment," Dutton ordered, "and get me addresses for everyone else on Halstead's list." Reeves was already pulling out his phone. Laura grabbed his arm. "Tell whoever goes to Hayes' place to approach carefully. If Halstead's there, they'll be armed federal agents, not local police," Reeves said. "They know what they're doing." Laura wanted to believe that. She'd seen too many operations go wrong to trust in professional competence alone. Tim appeared from the nurse's station, his face drawn. "Laura, there's someone here asking for you. Says it's urgent." "Who?" "Won't give a name, just keep saying you'll want to hear what he has to say about Halstead." Laura exchanged a glance with Dutton, who nodded. They followed Tim to one of the private consultation rooms where a man sat hunched in a plastic chair, wearing a police uniform that looked like it hadn't been changed in 24 hours. He was maybe 30, with the kind of exhausted eyes that came from too many double shifts and not enough sleep. His name tag read Officer M. Brady. "Major Voss?" He stood up quickly. "I'm Mark Brady. I worked with Sergeant Halstead." "Worked?" Dutton stepped forward. "Are you saying you've resigned?" "I'm saying I should have resigned years ago." Brady's hands were shaking. "I know where he is, where he took Brennan." The room went silent. Laura spoke carefully. "Why are you telling us this?" "Because I'm done covering for him. Done pretending the job is more important than doing what's right." Brady pulled out his phone and showed them a text message. "Halstead sent this 30 minutes ago. He wants me to meet him at the old Morrison Mill outside town. Says he needs help with the situation." Laura read the message. The Morrison Mill had been abandoned for 15 years, a sprawling complex of rusted machinery and condemned buildings on the edge of the industrial district. "He's asking you to help him with Brennan," Dutton said. "Yeah, and I'm done helping him hurt people." Brady looked at Laura. "I heard what you did. Standing up to him, getting federal investigators involved. I wanted to do that for years, but I was too afraid of losing my job, my pension, my—" He stopped. "I was just afraid. And that made me complicit in everything he did." "This text came 30 minutes ago," Laura said. "If you were going to meet him, you're already late." "I know. Which means he's either going to assume I'm not coming or that I sold him out." Brady's voice cracked slightly. "Either way, he's going to panic. And when Halstead panics, people get hurt." Dutton was already coordinating on her phone, pulling up satellite imagery of the Morrison Mill, directing tactical teams to staging positions. Laura watched the map on Dutton's screen. The mill was isolated, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned warehouses. Perfect for an ambush or a last stand. "We go in quiet," Dutton said. "No lights, no sirens. Tactical entry through the north access road." "He'll see you coming," Brady interrupted. "Halstead knows that facility. Used to patrol it when he was on night shift. He'll have sight lines on every approach." "Then how do we get close without being detected?" Brady pointed to a section of the map. "There's a drainage culvert that runs under the property. Comes up inside the main building through an old maintenance access. It's narrow, tight, but it's the only way in he won't be watching." Laura studied the map. "How narrow?" "Maybe 3 feet across. You'd have to crawl most of the way." Dutton shook her head. "My tactical team can't maneuver through a space that small with full gear." "Then you send someone who can." Laura met her eyes. "Someone who's been through worse to reach wounded soldiers under fire." "Absolutely not. You're a surgeon, not a tactical operator." "I'm a trauma surgeon with combat experience who's small enough to fit through that culvert and trained enough to assess Brennan's condition once I reach him." Laura's voice was steady. "If Halstead's planning to kill him, we need someone there to stabilize him until your team can extract." Dutton looked like she wanted to argue, but Colonel Reeves spoke first. "She's right. If Brennan's injured, he needs immediate medical intervention, and Major Voss has more field experience than anyone else here." This is insane, Dutton said. Probably, Laura agreed, but it's the best chance Brennan has. The decision was made in the kind of silence that follows, when everyone knows the plan is terrible, but nobody has a better one. 20 minutes later, Laura was in the back of an unmarked SUV heading toward the Morrison Mill with a tactical medical kit, a radio earpiece, and instructions to abort if anything felt wrong. Officer Brady rode with them, guiding the driver through back roads that bypassed the main approaches. They parked a quarter-mile from the mill and covered the remaining distance on foot, moving through scrub grass and industrial debris in the dark. The drainage culvert was exactly as bad as Brady had described. A concrete pipe barely wide enough for Laura's shoulders, slick with decades of accumulated water and decomposing leaves. She crawled in with a small LED headlamp, dragging the medical kit behind her. The earpiece crackled. "Voss, radio check." "I hear you," Laura whispered. "You're about 60 meters from the internal access point. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in the main building. 1 stationary, 1 mobile. Brennan and Halstead." Laura crawled faster, ignoring the way the concrete scraped her elbows and the smell of stagnant water that made her want to gag. The culvert seemed to go on forever, darkness pressing in from all sides. Then she saw light ahead, a faint glow filtering through a rusted metal grate. "I'm at the access point," she reported. "Hold position. We're moving tactical teams into support positions." Laura peered through the grate. She could see part of the mill's interior, a cavernous space filled with abandoned machinery, broken windows letting in moonlight, and shadows that moved in ways that made her skin crawl. Then she heard voices. "I don't understand why you brought me here." That was Brennan, his voice weak and slurred, still recovering from surgery, probably in pain, definitely terrified. "Because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Halstead's voice was different than Laura remembered, higher pitched, unstable. "I gave you a chance, multiple chances. All you had to do was stick to the story." "I told the truth." "The truth?" Halstead laughed, and the sound echoed through the empty building. "The truth is, I've spent 15 years keeping this city safe while people like you drain resources and cause problems. And one pushy nurse decides she knows better than everyone else. Suddenly, I'm the criminal?" Laura's fingers found the edge of the grate. It was held in place by old bolts that had rusted nearly through. She pulled slowly, testing the resistance. "Voss, what are you doing?" Dutton's voice in her ear. "Getting a better position," Laura whispered back. The grate came loose with a soft scrape of metal on concrete. Laura froze, but the voices inside continued without pause. She eased herself through the opening and into the mill, staying low behind a cluster of old machinery. Now she could see them. Halstead stood in the center of the space, his service weapon hanging loosely in one hand. Brennan was on the ground about 10 feet away, hands zip-tied behind his back, fresh blood on his hospital gown from where surgical staples had torn loose. "I didn't want it to come to this," Halstead was saying. "You understand that, right? This is self-defense. You attacked me. I subdued you. You escaped custody. I pursued, and tragically, you died resisting arrest. Nobody will believe that. They'll believe whatever the official report says. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." Halstead raised the gun. "I'm sorry, Eric. Really. But you should have stayed quiet." Laura moved without thinking, pure instinct and training overriding the part of her brain that understood tactical patience. She grabbed a piece of broken metal pipe from the debris beside her and threw it hard toward the far side of the building. The pipe hit a stack of old equipment with a crash that echoed like thunder. Halstead spun toward the sound, gun raised, leaving his back exposed. "Federal agents!" The shout came from multiple directions as tactical teams breached through doors and windows, moving with practiced precision. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" Halstead froze. For a second, Laura thought he might actually surrender. Then he grabbed Brennan by the hospital gown and hauled him upright, pressing the gun against Brennan's temple. "Stay back!" Halstead's voice cracked. "I'll kill him! I swear I'll do it!" The tactical teams stopped, weapons trained but held in check. Nobody wanted to risk a shot with a hostage that close. Laura stayed hidden behind the machinery, her mind racing through options. Brennan was swaying on his feet, barely conscious. If Halstead fired, or if Brennan collapsed, this would end badly. "Sergeant Halstead," that was Agent Dutton's voice, projected through a megaphone from outside. "Let Eric Brennan go. We can work this out." "There's nothing to work out. I'm not going to prison because some homeless junkie lied about me." "He didn't lie. We have video evidence, body camera footage that shows exactly what happened." Halstead's face went through several emotions: denial, rage, desperation. "Then I'm already finished." "Not if you let him go." Not if you surrender now. You think I'm stupid? I know how this works. I helped write the playbook. Halstead backed toward a door at the rear of the building, dragging Brennan with him. I'm walking out of here. Anyone tries to stop me, Brennan dies. Laura assessed the angles. Halstead was moving toward an exit that led to the loading docks. If he made it outside, he could use Brennan as a shield to reach a vehicle, and this would turn into a pursuit that ended in tragedy. She keyed her radio. He's heading for the north loading dock. If he gets outside, we know, Dutton cut her off. Teams are repositioning. But repositioning took time. Laura watched Halstead backing toward the door, watched Brennan's legs starting to give out, watched the situation spiraling toward inevitable violence. Then Brennan made a choice. He went completely limp, dropping his full weight against the zip ties binding his wrists. Halstead, unprepared for the sudden shift, stumbled. His grip loosened for just a fraction of a second. Brennan twisted sideways and fell. The gun went off, a sound like the world ending in that enclosed space. Laura was moving before the echo faded, sprinting across open ground with her medical kit. She reached Brennan in seconds, hands already assessing for injuries. Blood. Too much blood. Gunshot wound to the upper chest, just below the clavicle. Through and through, based on the exit wound Laura could see when she rolled him slightly. I need immediate medical evacuation, Laura shouted into her radio while her hands worked on autopilot. Pressure on the wound, checking airway, monitoring breathing. Around her, tactical teams swarmed Halstead. He didn't resist, just stood there holding the empty gun, staring at Brennan like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. I didn't mean to, Halstead said to no one in particular. He moved. It was an accident. Laura blocked him out, focused entirely on Brennan. The chest wound was bad but survivable if she could control the bleeding and prevent a collapsed lung. She packed the wound with gauze from her kit, established an airway, started an IV line using a pen light held between her teeth for illumination. Brennan, stay with me, she said. You're going to be okay. Just keep breathing. His eyes found hers, tried to focus, failed. Tell them, he whispered. Tell them what he did. They already know. The whole story. You made sure of that. Laura adjusted the pressure dressing. Now stop talking and let me work. Paramedics arrived, bringing a stretcher and proper equipment. Laura gave them a rapid handoff, wound location, estimated blood loss, current interventions, and watched them load Brennan for transport. Only then did she look up and see Halstead being led away in handcuffs, still muttering about accidents and self-defense, and how none of this was supposed to happen. Agent Dutton appeared beside Laura, looking at the blood covering Laura's hands and clothes. Is he going to make it? If he gets to surgery in the next 20 minutes, probably. Laura stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. After that, it depends on damage we can't see yet. You saved his life. Again. Just doing my job. Your job is medicine. This was... Dutton gestured at the mill, the tactical teams, the chaos. This was something else entirely. Laura didn't have an answer for that. She followed Dutton outside where the night had turned into a law enforcement convention. Police vehicles, federal SUVs, ambulances, even a news helicopter circling overhead with a spotlight that turned the industrial wasteland into something from a movie. Officer Brady was sitting in the back of an ambulance getting his blood pressure checked, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past hour. He saw Laura and stood up. Is Brennan alive? Laura said. Thanks to you giving us the location. Brady nodded slowly. I should have done it sooner. Should have stopped Halstead years ago. You're doing it now. That matters. Does it? How many people got hurt because I was too afraid to speak up? Laura looked at him, really looked at him, and saw someone she recognized. Someone who'd made choices they regretted and was trying to figure out how to live with the consequences. What matters is what you do next, she said, whether you keep speaking up or go back to being quiet. Brady held her gaze for a long moment. I'm testifying. Whatever they need, I'll tell them everything I know about Halstead, about the department, about all of it. Good. Laura left him there and found a quiet corner behind one of the federal vehicles where she could sit down and process what had just happened. Her hands were still shaking, delayed adrenaline response, perfectly normal, completely unwelcome. Colonel Reeves found her a few minutes later, carrying a bottle of water and a blanket. Drink this, he ordered. Laura drank. The water tasted like plastic and metal, but it was cold and real and helped anchor her to the present moment. That was reckless, Reeves said. I know. Going into a hostage situation without backup, without proper tactical support, I know. If Halstead had seen you before the teams breached, I know. Laura's voice came out sharper than intended. She took a breath. I know it was reckless, but Brennan needed someone there who could keep him alive, and I was the only option available. So I took it. Reeves sat down beside her. You can't save everyone, Laura. Watch me try. They sat in silence for a while, watching the controlled chaos of a crime scene being processed. Eventually, Reeves spoke again. The federal investigation is expanding. Dutton's team found evidence of systematic misconduct throughout the entire police department. This goes way beyond Halstead. How far? Chief of police knew about the complaints and buried them. City attorney helped draft legal strategies to dismiss lawsuits. Even the mayor's office received reports and did nothing. Reeves paused. This is going to tear Millbrook Falls apart. Laura thought about the city she'd called home for 3 years. Thought about all the people who'd stayed quiet because speaking up meant losing everything. Thought about what it would take to rebuild trust in institutions that had proven themselves fundamentally broken. Sometimes things need to break before they can be fixed, she said. Her phone buzzed. A text from Tim at the hospital. Hayes found safe at her sister's house. Scared, but unharmed. Halstead never made it to her. Laura felt something loosen in her chest. One person safe. One small victory in a night full of trauma. Another text arrived. This one from Agent Dutton. Brennan in surgery. Surgeons optimistic. And we found something else. Laura called her immediately. What did you find? Body camera footage from other officers. Turns out Halstead wasn't the only one wearing a camera the night he arrested Brennan. One of the responding backup officers had his camera running too. Dutton's voice had a sharp edge of satisfaction. It shows everything, the entire encounter, including Halstead planting evidence in Brennan's pockets after he was unconscious. He planted evidence? A small bag of methamphetamine, enough to justify additional charges and make Brennan's testimony seem less credible. Dutton paused. Which means this isn't just excessive force and medical negligence. It's evidence tampering, federal crime. And with your testimony about the delayed treatment, we can prove Halstead knowingly endangered Brennan's life to cover up the assault. Laura closed her eyes. The scope of Halstead's corruption kept expanding, like pulling on a thread and watching an entire garment unravel. How many other cases? She asked. We're reviewing everything now, but based on what we've found so far, probably dozens, maybe more. The full weight of it settled over Laura. Not just what Halstead had done, but all the people who'd been hurt, imprisoned, discredited, destroyed by a system that protected its own instead of the truth. I want to testify, Laura said. At trial, depositions, whatever you need. I want to make sure every single piece of this comes out. You'll get your chance. Halstead's looking at federal charges that could put him away for 20 years minimum. Dutton hesitated. But Laura, you need to understand what you're signing up for. The defense will come after you hard. Question your credibility, your military service, your motivations. They'll try to paint you as someone with a grudge against law enforcement. Let them try. I'm serious. This is going to get ugly. Agent Dutton, I've been shot at by actual enemies in actual war zones. I think I can handle some lawyers asking uncomfortable questions. Dutton laughed, a short, sharp sound. Fair enough. I'll be in touch about scheduling. She hung up. Laura sat there with the phone in her hand, watching the sun start to rise over Millbrook Falls. The chemical plant was still smoldering in the distance, a reminder that the disaster which had started all of this was barely 24 hours old. Tim called. Where are you? Morrison Mill. Long story. We'll get back here. We've got incoming multi-vehicle accident on Highway 89, at least 6 patients. On my way. Laura stood up, folded the blanket, and headed for the federal SUV that would take her back to Redfield General. Back to the work she actually understood. The work that made sense even when everything else was chaos. The ER was exactly as she'd left it. Controlled chaos. Patients in various states of distress. Staff moving with practiced efficiency. Laura scrubbed the blood from her hands, changed into clean scrubs, and dove back into the familiar rhythm of assessment, treatment, stabilization. It felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. She was suturing a laceration on a teenager from the car accident when Dr. Kemp appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, just watching her work. Major Voss, he said finally, can we talk? Laura finished the last stitch before looking up. I'm busy. I can see that, but this won't take long. Kemp stepped into the room, looking uncomfortable in a way Laura had never seen before. I owe you an apology. You owe me more than that. I know. Kemp's voice was quiet. I made the wrong call. Multiple wrong calls. I let my fear of conflict override my medical judgment, and a patient nearly died because of it. Laura set down her instruments. Eric Brennan did nearly die. Twice. Once from the head injury Halstead gave him, and again tonight when Halstead shot him. Both times he was a victim of a system that valued convenience over care. You're right. I know I'm right. The question is what you're going to do about it. Kemp met her eyes. I've submitted my resignation to Administrator Werner, effective immediately. Laura hadn't expected that. You're quitting? I'm accepting responsibility for my failures, and I'm recommending that you be appointed interim ER director until the hospital can find a permanent replacement. I don't want your job, Kemp.
Maybe not, but you're the one everyone in this ER actually trusts to do what's right instead of what's easy. Kemp pulled an envelope from his pocket. My formal letter of resignation. It includes a complete account of my decisions regarding Eric Brennan's care and my reasons for suspending you. Agent Dutton will receive a copy as part of the federal investigation. Laura took the envelope. This doesn't fix what happened. I know, but it's a start. Kemp turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, Major Voss, you were right about everything. I just wish I'd had the courage to see it sooner. He left. Laura stood there holding the resignation letter, feeling something shift in the careful walls she'd built around her anger. The rest of the day blurred together. Patients treated, lives saved. The constant flow of human suffering and resilience that defined emergency medicine. By the time Laura's shift ended, the sun was setting again, and she'd been awake for nearly 48 hours straight. She was heading for the parking lot when her phone rang. Unknown number. Major Voss? The voice was unfamiliar. This is Dr. Sarah Kim from Surgical ICU. I'm calling about Eric Brennan. Laura's stomach clenched. He's stable. Surgery went well. We repaired the vascular damage. And barring complications, he should make a full recovery. Dr. Kim paused. But he's asking for you. Says he won't talk to anyone else. I'll be right there. Laura found Brennan in a private ICU room, intubated and sedated, but conscious enough to track movement with his eyes. She pulled up a chair beside his bed. Hey, she said softly. I hear you've been asking for me. Brennan blinked, once for yes, twice for no. Their agreed-upon communication method while he was on the ventilator. Do you remember what happened at the mill? One blink, yes. Halstead's in federal custody. He's not going to hurt you or anyone else ever again. Brennan's eyes filled with tears. He tried to reach for Laura's hand, but the restraints, medical, not criminal, held him in place. You're safe now, Laura continued. And when you're strong enough to talk, there are people who want to hear your full story, not just about last night, but about everything. Every time someone in authority hurt you or dismissed you or made you feel like you didn't matter. One blink. And this time, people are listening. Brennan's tears spilled over, running down his face into the ventilator tape. Laura reached out and gently wiped them away. Get some rest, she said. I'll be back to check on you tomorrow. She left the ICU and made it all the way to her car before exhaustion finally caught up with her. Laura sat in the driver's seat, keys in hand, and realized she was too tired to safely make the drive home. Her phone buzzed. A text from Colonel Reeves. Hotel room reserved for you at the Millbrook Inn. Federal security detail outside. Get some sleep before you kill yourself. Laura almost argued. Then she recognized the futility and drove to the hotel instead. The room was clean, anonymous, exactly what she needed. Laura showered off 2 days' worth of blood and fear and trauma, fell into bed wearing the complimentary bathrobe, and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of helicopters and gunfire and operating rooms where the wounded never stopped coming. Woke up 6 hours later with her heart racing and sheets soaked with sweat. The bedside clock read 3:47 a.m. Laura's phone was ringing. She grabbed it without looking at the caller ID. Voss? Major Voss, this is Agent Dutton. We have a situation. Laura was already pulling on clothes. What kind of situation? Administrator Werner just showed up at the federal field office with boxes of documents. Hospital records, internal memos, budget reports, everything. Dutton's voice was tight. And she's claiming the entire corruption network goes higher than we thought, that there are city officials, county supervisors, even state representatives involved in covering up police misconduct. Why is she talking now? Because the hospital board just voted to terminate her employment and blame everything on her negligence. She's facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete career destruction. Dutton paused. So she's burning everyone who threw her under the bus. Laura processed this. Werner had spent years protecting the system, and now the system was protecting itself by sacrificing her. The irony was almost beautiful. What do you need from me? Nothing tonight, but tomorrow morning we're convening a grand jury, and we're going to need you to walk them through everything. Brennan's medical timeline, the suspension, the delayed care, all of it.
I'll be there. Major Voss? Dutton's voice softened slightly. You should know that what you started, standing up to Halstead, refusing to stay quiet, it's become something bigger than anyone anticipated. This investigation is going to reshape Millbrook Falls completely. Laura looked out the hotel window at the dark city below. Good. It needs reshaping. She hung up and tried to go back to sleep, but her mind was racing too fast. Instead, she got dressed properly and drove back to Redfield General, where the night shift was in full swing and no one questioned why she was there at 4 a.m. Tim found her in the break room reviewing patient charts. You're supposed to be resting. Can't sleep. Laura, you're going to burn out. I've been burning out for 3 years. This is just the first time anyone noticed. She set down the chart. How's the ER handling things? Surprisingly well, actually. Kemp's resignation shook everyone up, but in a good way. People are talking, actually talking about problems instead of pretending everything's fine. That's something, at least. Tim sat down across from her. I heard about Werner bringing documents to the feds. Is it true the corruption goes all the way to state level? Looks that way. Jesus. Tim ran a hand through his hair. This town's going to implode. Or rebuild itself into something better. You really believe that? Laura thought about Eric Brennan, who'd survived a brain bleed and a gunshot wound because people finally stopped looking away. Thought about Officer Brady, who'd found his courage years too late, but at least had found it. Thought about all the witnesses who were finally willing to speak because someone else had spoken first. Yeah, she said, I really do. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. You don't know me, but I work dispatch. Wanted to say thank you for what you did. My sister was one of Halstead's victims 3 years ago. Nobody believed her. Now maybe they will. Laura stared at the message. Then another one came in from a different number. I'm a nurse at County General. We've had the same problems here. Watching what you did gave me the courage to file my own complaint against an abusive officer. Then another, and another. Messages from people across Millbrook Falls and beyond. Healthcare workers, victims, witnesses, all of them saying the same thing in different ways. Thank you for speaking up. Thank you for not staying quiet. Thank you for making it safe for the rest of us to tell the truth. Laura's hand started shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear or exhaustion. It was from the weight of suddenly understanding exactly how many people had been waiting for someone to take the first step into the light. Tim was reading over her shoulder. Holy shit, Laura, you've started a movement. I just did my job. No, you did way more than that. He looked at her with something like awe. You changed everything. Before Laura could respond, the ER doors burst open and paramedics wheeled in a trauma patient. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, pressure dropping, minutes from bleeding out. Laura was on her feet instantly, all thoughts of movements and messages and grand juries forgotten in the immediate need to save a life. Talk to me, she ordered as they transferred the patient to a trauma bay. 26-year-old male, single GSW to the upper left quadrant, estimated blood loss 2 liters. Get me 4 units O negative, prep for immediate laparotomy, and someone call surgery. Laura's hands were already moving, cutting away clothing, assessing the wound, establishing access. The patient's eyes found hers. Young, terrified, fading fast. Am I going to die? Laura looked directly at him. Not if I can help it. She worked with the focused intensity that came from years of practice and the absolute refusal to let death win when there was still a chance at life. Around her, the ER team moved in synchronized efficiency, the kind of teamwork that only came from shared experience and mutual trust. They stabilized the patient, got him to surgery, saved his life. Laura stripped off her bloody gloves and realized the sun had risen again without her noticing. Another day in Millbrook Falls. Another chance to get things right. Agent Dutton was waiting in the hallway when Laura emerged from the trauma bay. Grand jury's been moved up, she said. They want to hear testimony this afternoon. I'll be there. There's something else. Dutton pulled out her tablet. We've been monitoring communications. Halstead's attorney just filed a motion to suppress all evidence obtained after your military activation, claiming federal overreach and... The lights in the hospital went out. Complete darkness for 3 seconds. Then emergency backup power kicked in, bathing everything in the sickly yellow glow of battery-powered lighting. What the hell? Tim appeared from the nurse's station. We've never lost main power before. Laura's tactical instincts fired simultaneously with her medical training. Power outages in hospitals were serious. Ventilators, monitors, life support systems all had battery backup, but only for limited time. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in a hospital. Glass breaking. Multiple windows. Systematic. And footsteps. Running. Coming from the administrative wing. Agent Dutton already had her weapon drawn. We need to evacuate. The explosion cut her off. A concussive blast from somewhere deep in the hospital that shook the walls and set off every alarm still connected to backup power. Laura grabbed the nearest patient chart, checked critical cases, started making rapid triage decisions about who could move and who needed to shelter in place. Tim, get every mobile patient into the stairwells. Anyone on life support stays here with nursing staff. Now! The second explosion was closer, louder, somewhere in the direction of the ICU, where Eric Brennan was recovering. Laura ran. The smoke hit Laura before she reached the ICU, thick, chemical-smelling, wrong, in ways that triggered memories of burning vehicles in places she'd spent years trying to forget. She pulled her scrub top over her nose and kept moving through the yellow emergency lighting that turned familiar hallways into something from a nightmare. Agent Dutton was right behind her, weapon drawn, radio crackling with overlapping voices reporting chaos throughout the hospital. Someone screaming about fire in the administrative wing. Someone else yelling about intruders near the pharmacy. The controlled environment of a medical facility was fracturing into pure disorder. Laura hit the ICU doors and found them blocked by debris. Ceiling tiles, broken equipment, fragments of wall that had blown outward from the explosion. She started pulling pieces away with her bare hands. Voss, wait for backup. People are dying in there. Laura heaved aside a section of collapsed door frame. I'm not waiting. She squeezed through the gap. The ICU beyond looked like a bomb had gone off, which, based on the scorch marks and shattered glass, was exactly what had happened. Emergency ventilators were screaming alarms. Monitors displayed flat lines or error messages. And through the smoke, Laura could see patients still in their beds, some conscious and terrified, others ominously still. But Eric Brennan's room was empty. The bed rails were down, IV lines torn loose, and the window had been blown completely out of its frame. No! Laura ran to the window and looked down. 3 stories to the parking lot below. No body, no blood trail. Just broken glass glittering in the emergency vehicle lights that were starting to swarm the hospital. A nurse emerged from the smoke, coughing hard. Laura recognized her. Angela Morrison, night shift ICU supervisor, 20 years experience. Where's Brennan? Laura demanded. 2 men came in right before the explosion. Angela's voice was raw from smoke inhalation. Security uniforms, but I'd never seen them before. They said they were moving him to protective isolation. I tried to check their credentials, but then everything just... She gestured helplessly at the destruction. They took him out through the service elevator. Laura was already moving. She grabbed a portable radio from a nurse's station that was somehow still standing and keyed the emergency channel. This is Major Voss. Eric Brennan has been taken from ICU by 2 unknown individuals in security uniforms. They're using the service elevator. I need all exits locked down now. The response came back immediately from hospital security, but it was already too late. The service elevator opened directly to the loading docks, and by the time Laura reached ground level, all she found was an abandoned wheelchair and drops of blood that disappeared into the maze of delivery trucks and emergency vehicles outside. Brennan was gone. Again. Laura stood in the loading dock doorway, rage and frustration warring with professional training. Someone had orchestrated this. The power outage, the explosions, the fake security personnel. Someone with resources and planning and absolutely nothing left to lose. Her phone rang. Unknown number again, but Laura answered anyway. Major Voss. The voice was male, calm, familiar in a way that made her skin crawl. I believe I have something you're looking for. Who is this? Someone who's watched you tear apart a carefully constructed system over the past 48 hours. A pause. I'm impressed, actually. Halstead was sloppy, emotional. You're much more dangerous because you actually believe you're doing the right thing. Laura's mind raced through possibilities. The voice had authority, not police authority, but something deeper. Political weight. Where's Brennan? Safe, for now. Whether he stays that way depends entirely on you. If you hurt him, you'll what? Call federal investigators? Alert the media? Major Voss, I am the media in this town. I'm also the city council, the county supervisors, the business owners who fund political campaigns. The voice hardened. I'm the reason Millbrook Falls functions, and you've spent 2 days trying to burn it all down over one junkie's word against a decorated officer. Brennan's not a junkie, and Halstead's not decorated. He's a criminal who you've been protecting. Protecting? No. Managing. There's the difference. The caller sighed. Halstead served a purpose, kept certain elements under control, maintained order in ways that official channels couldn't. Yes, he was occasionally excessive. But the alternative, letting people like Brennan drain resources, cause problems, make the city look bad, That costs us more in the long run. And see,
Laura felt something cold settle in her chest. This wasn't a rogue cop covering his tracks. This was systematic, institutional, exactly what Agent Dutton had warned about. You're admitting to conspiracy. I'm explaining reality and offering you a choice. The voice turned businesslike. Drop the investigation. Tell the federal agents you were mistaken about the scope of misconduct. Testify that Halstead acted alone, without department or city knowledge. Do that, and Eric Brennan lives. He even gets proper medical care, a fresh start somewhere far from here. And if I refuse, then Brennan disappears permanently, along with any evidence he might provide. And you'll spend the rest of your career wondering if saving one homeless man's life was worth letting a dozen others die in the chaos that follows when cities lose all sense of order. The call ended. Laura stood there with the phone in her hand, processing implications and calculating angles. Whoever had just called her had power, real power, the kind that could orchestrate hospital attacks and kidnap federal witnesses. But they'd also just made a critical mistake. They'd admitted everything on a call that Laura had recorded. She pulled up her phone's recording app, running since the moment she'd answered, and sent the audio file directly to Agent Dutton with a single-word message: leverage. Then she went back inside the hospital to do what she actually knew how to do: save the people who were dying while others played games with power. The ICU was being evacuated, patients transferred to other floors or other hospitals entirely. Laura worked alongside the staff, moving ventilator-dependent patients first, checking that backup batteries were holding, making sure nobody got left behind in the smoke and confusion. She was helping load a post-surgical patient onto a gurney when Agent Dutton appeared, looking like she'd just run a marathon through hell. "I got your recording," Dutton said. "We're running voice analysis now, cross-referencing with known city officials." "My money's on Mayor Douglas Whitmore," Laura replied. "He's been mayor for 12 years, sits on every important board, and has a reputation for getting things done regardless of legal niceties." "That matches the profile." Dutton pulled out her tablet. "But we have a bigger problem. The explosions weren't just cover for taking Brennan. Someone planted devices throughout the hospital, administration offices, medical records, anywhere that might contain documentation of the corruption. They're destroying evidence. Trying to. Our forensic team is recovering what they can, but a lot of it's just gone." Dutton's expression was grim. "Without physical documentation and without Brennan's testimony, our case gets a lot weaker." Laura thought about that. Thought about all the witnesses who'd come forward, all the complaints that had been buried, all the victims who'd finally found courage to speak. "You have Werner's documents," she said. "The ones she brought you last night." "We do, but her credibility is compromised. She's a disgraced administrator trying to save herself. Defense attorneys will shred her testimony." Then we find other sources. Hospital staff who witnessed Halstead's behavior, patients he abused, officers like Brady who are willing to testify about department culture. Laura met Dutton's eyes. "And we get Brennan back. How? We don't even know where they took him." Laura pulled out her phone and opened the tracking app she'd installed weeks ago. Standard protocol for monitoring expensive hospital equipment. Specifically, the portable ultrasound unit that was currently missing from inventory. The same unit she'd used to assess Brennan's injuries at the Morrison Mill. The same unit that was still in the medical kit someone had grabbed when they evacuated Brennan from ICU. The same unit that had a GPS tracker embedded in its battery pack. Laura showed Dutton the screen. A small blue dot pulsed on the map, about 15 miles outside Millbrook Falls at a location marked as the Whitmore Industrial Complex. Dutton stared at the dot. "That's the mayor's property." Coincidence? There's no such thing as coincidence in an investigation this dirty. Dutton was already coordinating on her radio, calling in tactical teams, setting up perimeter positions. "We're going to need warrants, proper authorization. By the time you get all that, Brennan could be dead. I can't just raid the mayor's property on suspicion in a GPS tracker." "You can if you have probable cause, like a recorded confession from someone admitting to kidnapping a federal witness." Laura pulled up the audio file again. "Run your voice analysis. If it matches Whitmore, you have everything you need." Dutton listened to the recording one more time, her expression shifting from skeptical to determined. "This is going to get ugly," she said. "It's already ugly. Now it just gets public." The voice analysis came back 20 minutes later while Laura was treating minor injuries from the evacuation. The match was 97% certain. Mayor Douglas Whitmore. Millbrook Falls' longest-serving mayor, decorated businessman, community leader, and according to the federal database Dutton pulled up, subject of 3 previous corruption investigations that had mysteriously stalled before producing indictments. "He's protected," Dutton said. "State-level connections, friends in the Attorney General's office,
Enough political weight to bury investigations before they get started. Not this time. Laura stripped off her gloves. This time you have recordings, witnesses, and a kidnapped federal witness being held on his property. Even political connections can't make that disappear. Dutton made a call. Then another. Laura watched her navigate the bureaucratic maze of federal law enforcement, calling in favors and invoking regulations and generally doing whatever it took to get authorization for what came next. Finally, Dutton looked up. We're authorized to raid the Whitmore complex. But Laura, you need to stay here. Let the tactical teams handle... No. This isn't a negotiation. You're a civilian. I'm a military trauma surgeon with active reserve status and combat experience. And if Brennan's injured, your tactical team won't know what to do. Laura grabbed a fresh medical kit. I'm going. Dutton looked like she wanted to argue. Then she just nodded and led the way to the waiting SUVs. The drive to Whitmore Industrial Complex took 12 minutes through streets that were starting to wake up to news of the hospital attack. Laura could see it in the faces of people standing outside their homes, watching emergency vehicles stream past. Fear. Confusion. The beginning of understanding that something fundamental had broken in their city. The complex was a sprawling property on the edge of town, warehouses, office buildings, and at the center, a renovated factory that served as Whitmore's private headquarters. It looked more like a fortress than a business center, with high walls and security gates that would have made military installations jealous. Tactical teams were already in position when they arrived, surrounding the property with the kind of precision that suggested they'd done this before. Agent Dutton coordinated from a mobile command center while Laura watched the GPS tracker on her phone. The blue dot was stationary. 3rd floor of the main building, eastern wing. He's in there, Laura said. We know. Thermal imaging confirms 2 heat signatures in that location. 1 prone, 1 standing. Dutton studied the building schematic on her tablet. Problem is, Whitmore's lawyers are already here, threatening lawsuits and claiming illegal search. Show them the warrant. They're claiming the warrant was obtained under false pretenses, that the recording is inadmissible because you didn't announce you were recording. Dutton's jaw tightened. It's bullshit legal maneuvering, but it's effective. We're stuck outside while they destroy evidence and potentially harm Brennan. Laura looked at the building, looked at the lawyers clustered near the front gate, all expensive suits and confident smirks. Looked at the tactical teams waiting for authorization that might never come. Then she made a decision. I'm going in. Laura, you can't enter without authorization. I can. I'm not federal law enforcement. I'm a private citizen looking for stolen hospital property. Laura held up her phone showing the GPS tracker. And I have reasonable cause to believe that property is inside that building. That's the thinnest legal justification I've ever heard. Then arrest me after I find Brennan. Laura was already walking toward a section of the perimeter fence that looked climbable. Or better yet, follow me in once I've established that a medical emergency exists inside requiring immediate intervention. She didn't wait for permission. The fence was 12 feet high with razor wire at the top, but Laura had climbed worse and worse conditions. She scaled it in under a minute, dropped to the other side, and ran toward the main building while lawyers shouted behind her and Dutton coordinated tactical teams to be ready for whatever happened next. The building's service entrance was locked, but the lock was old and Laura had learned a few things from military police during her deployment. 30 seconds with a credit card and the door clicked open. Inside, the complex was eerily quiet. Corporate offices on the 1st floor, all dark. Manufacturing spaces on the 2nd, machinery silent. Laura followed the GPS signal up a maintenance stairwell to the 3rd floor, where the eastern wing opened into what looked like executive offices. She could hear voices now. 2 people arguing. Told you this was a bad idea from the start. That was Mayor Whitmore, his voice carrying the same authority it had on the phone, but with an edge of panic underneath. Halstead was supposed to handle things quietly. Instead, he created a disaster. Halstead's in federal custody. The second voice was unfamiliar. Which means he's going to talk eventually. Offer deals, point fingers. Let him point. Without evidence, it's just his word. There's plenty of evidence. The hospital has records. The feds have witnesses. And this one, a sound of something hitting flesh, is a living testimony to everything we've been covering up for years. Laura moved closer, staying low and quiet. Through a partially open door, she could see into what looked like a converted conference room. Eric Brennan was zip-tied to a chair, blood running from a fresh split in his lip. Mayor Whitmore paced nearby while a man Laura didn't recognize stood over Brennan with the casual posture of someone comfortable with violence. We need to cut our losses, Whitmore was saying. Remove the witness. Destroy what documentation we can. Let Halstead take the fall for everything. And Major Voss? She's a problem, but she's also military, which makes her untouchable without causing more attention. We discredit her instead. Plant rumors about mental instability, PTSD, a grudge against law enforcement. Whitmore checked his watch. My media contacts are already crafting the narrative. Laura pulled out her phone and started recording again. Every word, every admission. What about the federal investigation? The other man asked. Dutton's good, but she's bound by procedure. We bog her down in legal challenges, drag everything into courts we control, and eventually people lose interest. They always do. Whitmore stopped pacing. The key is making sure there are no witnesses who can testify credibly about systematic corruption. Halstead was a rogue officer. Kemp was an incompetent administrator. Everything else is speculation. And if the feds don't buy it, then we have friends in state government who can apply pressure. The Attorney General owes me favors, so does the governor. Whitmore smiled. One thing you learn in politics, everyone's compromised if you dig deep enough. Laura had heard enough. She pushed the door open and walked in like she belonged there. Interesting theory, she said. Let's test it. Both men spun toward her. The man standing over Brennan reached for something at his waist, probably a weapon, but Laura was already moving. She grabbed a heavy desk lamp and threw it hard at his head. He ducked, which gave her the second she needed to close the distance and drive her knee into his solar plexus. He went down gasping. Laura kicked the gun away from where it had clattered to the floor and turned to face Mayor Whitmore, who was standing there like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. You're trespassing, he managed. You're kidnapping a federal witness. Laura pulled out her phone, still recording. And I have you admitting to corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Whitmore's face went through several colors before settling on something close to purple. That recording is illegal. Inadmissible. Maybe. Maybe not. But it's definitely going to be interesting when it gets leaked to every news outlet in Wyoming. Laura moved to Brennan and started cutting his zip ties with a pocket knife. How's your media narrative going to handle that? Brennan slumped forward when the ties came off. Laura caught him, checking his pupils and pulse. Bruised, but functional. No obvious signs of serious injury beyond what he'd already survived. Can you walk? She asked. Brennan nodded weakly. I think so. Good, because we're leaving. She helped him stand just as federal tactical teams crashed through every entrance simultaneously. The building filled with shouted commands, weapons drawn, agents swarming through corridors with the precision of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Agent Dutton appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. Laura supporting Brennan, Mayor Whitmore frozen in shock, the other man still gasping on the floor. You couldn't wait 5 more minutes for backup? Dutton asked. Brennan didn't have 5 minutes. Laura helped him toward the door. And your target just confessed to everything on my phone's recording. Dutton's eyes lit up. Please tell me you got him admitting to the conspiracy. Conspiracy, evidence destruction, witness tampering, and a few other things. Laura handed over her phone. Along with him name-dropping the Attorney General and Governor as accomplices. Dutton stopped, processing the implications. That's going to require a much bigger investigation. Sounds like your problem, not mine. Laura kept moving. I'm getting my patient back to a hospital that's hopefully not still on fire. They walked out of the Whitmore complex surrounded by federal agents while news helicopters circled overhead, and cameras captured Mayor Douglas Whitmore being led away in handcuffs. The sun was fully up now, bright and harsh, exposing everything. The ambulance ride back to Redfield General felt surreal. Laura sat with Brennan while paramedics monitored his vitals and federal agents coordinated next steps. The hospital itself was still standing. The fires had been contained, the damage less severe than it had initially appeared. Dr. Sarah Kim met them at the ER entrance. I heard you found him, she said. More like I created an incident that forced people to return him. Laura helped transfer Brennan to a gurney. How bad is the hospital damage? ICU's going to be closed for at least a week while we repair the blast damage. We're diverting critical patients to County General. Kim started her assessment of Brennan. But structurally, we're okay. Could have been much worse. Laura nodded and stepped back, letting the hospital staff do what they did best. She was bone-tired, covered in various people's blood, and pretty sure she'd just committed about a dozen technical violations of federal law. But Eric Brennan was alive. Mayor Whitmore was in custody, and the recording on her phone was already being transcribed by federal investigators who looked like Christmas had come early. Tim found her in the break room 20 minutes later, staring at terrible coffee. You're insane, he said. Completely insane. Probably. Climbing a fence, breaking into the mayor's building, assaulting his security. Security consultant, Laura corrected. And I didn't assault him. I defended myself and a federal witness from imminent harm. That's the thinnest justification I've ever heard. Agent Dutton said the same thing. Laura took a sip of coffee and immediately regretted it. How's the staff handling everything? Shocked, scared, but also, Tim sat down, also kind of energized. People are talking about things that have been wrong for years. Actually talking, not just whispering. Good. Laura, do you understand what you've done? You've taken down a police sergeant, a hospital administrator, and the mayor in 2 days. 3 days, technically. This isn't a joke. These are powerful people with connections. Even from jail, they can make your life hell. Laura looked at him. They already tried, suspended me, threatened me, kidnapped my patient, blew up part of the hospital. What else can they do? Fair point. Tim leaned back. So what happens now? Before Laura could answer, her phone rang. Agent Dutton. Major Voss, we have developments, multiple developments. Tell me. First, the Attorney General's office just announced they're recusing themselves from anything related to Millbrook Falls due to potential conflicts of interest, which means the case stays federal. That's good, right? Very good. Second, we've had 17 more people come forward with complaints about police misconduct, including 3 current officers who are willing to testify about department culture. Laura felt something shift in her chest. They're not afraid anymore. No. You made it safe to speak up. Dutton paused. Third, and this is the complicated one, the governor's office is demanding your immediate termination from any federal medical positions, claiming you've abused authority and engaged in unlawful actions. Let them try. I'm in active reserve. They can't touch my military status. They're also threatening to pull state funding from Redfield General unless the hospital takes disciplinary action against you. Laura laughed, a short, sharp sound. The hospital that just had its administrator resign in disgrace is going to discipline me for exposing corruption? Good luck with that. Actually, Dutton's voice changed, became more careful. The hospital board met an hour ago. They want to offer you the position of permanent ER director. The words didn't make sense at first. Laura had to replay them in her head to be sure she'd heard correctly. They want me to what? Run the emergency department. Full authority, full support, complete restructuring of protocols to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Dutton paused. They're calling it accountability. I call it covering their asses. But either way, it's yours if you want it. Laura sat there processing. 2 days ago, she'd been suspended for doing her job. Now they wanted her to run the entire department. What about the governor's threats? Political posturing. The board's lawyer says state funding threats would violate about 6 different federal regulations. And frankly, with the media attention this case is getting, the governor can't afford to be seen punishing whistleblowers. Dutton's voice softened. You've won, Major Voss. Completely. Against people who never lose. I didn't do it to win. I know. That's why you actually did. Laura ended the call and sat there for a long moment. Tim was watching her with an expression that was part admiration, part concern. So? He asked. So they want me to be ER director. Are you going to take it? Laura thought about it. Thought about all the fights ahead, restructuring a broken system, changing entrenched culture, facing resistance from people who preferred the old way of doing things. Thought about the patients who needed advocates, and the staff who needed leadership, and the community that needed healing. Yeah, she said. I'm going to take it. The next 72 hours were a blur of interviews, depositions, and media appearances that Laura mostly avoided. The story went national. Small-town corruption exposed by military nurse. Federal investigation reveals systematic abuse. Mayor arrested along with police sergeant. News channels couldn't get enough of it. Laura gave exactly 1 interview to a local reporter who'd been covering City Hall corruption for years without anyone paying attention. Why did you speak up when so many others stayed quiet? The reporter asked. Laura thought about that question. Thought about all the easy answers she could give. Because someone had to, she said finally. And I was in a position to survive the consequences. The reporter pressed. What advice would you give to others who see wrongdoing but are afraid to report it? Document everything, find allies, and understand that doing the right thing doesn't mean you won't pay a price. Laura looked directly at the camera. But also understand that staying silent has a price too. You just pay it in pieces, over years, watching good people get hurt while you pretend you didn't see it happening. The interview went viral. Laura's phone exploded with messages, some supportive, some threatening, most just people wanting to tell their own stories of times they'd stayed quiet and regretted it. Eric Brennan was transferred out of ICU after 48 hours and moved to a secure federal medical facility where he could recover under guard. Laura visited him before the transfer. I never thanked you, Brennan said. His voice was stronger now, though still rough from the ventilator. For saving my life. Multiple times.
Just doing my job. No. Brennan met her eyes. You did way more than your job. You risked everything, your career, your safety, your life, for someone you didn't even know. Laura pulled up a chair. I knew enough. I knew you deserved medical care regardless of your circumstances. I knew Halstead was wrong. That was enough.
The federal prosecutors say my testimony is going to be crucial for the case against Whitmore and the others. Are you ready for that? Brennan nodded slowly. I've been invisible my whole life. People looked through me, not at me. Now I have a chance to make what happened to me actually mean something.
He paused. That's because of you. No, it's because you had the courage to tell the truth even when it was dangerous. You made it safe to tell the truth.
Laura didn't have an answer for that. She just sat with him in comfortable silence until the federal marshals arrived to coordinate the transfer. On her fourth day back at work, now as ER director, which felt surreal every time someone used the title, Laura was reviewing new protocols when Officer Mark Brady appeared at her office door. Major Voss, do you have a minute? Come in. Brady entered hesitantly, still wearing his police uniform, but looking like he'd aged a decade. I wanted to update you. The department's undergoing a complete overhaul. New police chief coming in from outside, federal oversight for the next 5 years. And Internal Affairs is reviewing every complaint filed in the past decade. That's good. It's necessary. Brady sat down. I also wanted to tell you that I'm testifying. Against Halstead. Against the culture that enabled him. All of it. That takes courage. So does what you did. Brady looked at her directly. I spent years being afraid. Afraid of losing my job if I spoke up. Afraid of being labeled a troublemaker. And that fear made me complicit in a lot of harm. What changed? You did. Watching someone actually stand up to Halstead and survive. More than survive, actually win. It made me realize the only thing worse than the consequences of speaking up would be spending the rest of my life knowing I stayed quiet. Laura nodded. The investigation's going to be difficult. Defense attorneys will try to discredit you. Let them try. I have documentation. Years of it. Every questionable arrest, every complaint that got buried, every time I saw something wrong and didn't report it. Brady's voice was steady. I can't undo the past, but I can make sure it gets exposed. After he left, Laura sat at her desk and thought about courage. Real courage. Not the kind that came from training or adrenaline, but the kind that meant facing consequences and choosing to do the right thing anyway. Her phone buzzed. A text from Agent Dutton. Grand jury just handed down indictments. Halstead, 23 counts. Whitmore, 31 counts. 6 other officials. This is going to be the biggest corruption trial Wyoming's seen in decades. Laura responded, Good. They earned it. The reply came back immediately. So did you. Federal government wants to offer you a position as medical consultant for corruption investigations. Basically what you just did, but officially. Laura stared at the message. Part of her was tempted. The idea of exposing corruption systematically, helping other whistleblowers, making sure what happened in Millbrook Falls couldn't happen elsewhere. But another part of her looked around at the ER she was now responsible for, at the staff who needed leadership, and the patients who needed care, and the community that needed healing. She typed back, Thanks, but no. I have work to do here. Figured you'd say that. Offer stands if you change your mind. Laura put the phone away and went back to reviewing protocols. There was satisfaction in the mundane work of administration, setting standards, enforcing accountability, building systems that protected patients instead of powerful people. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm she hadn't expected. The hospital slowly recovered from the attack. The ER staff adapted to new leadership. And Millbrook Falls began the long process of reckoning with how badly its institutions had failed. Laura was in surgery when she got the news about Jennifer Hayes. The young nurse who'd first testified against Halstead had been offered a position as patient advocate, specifically tasked with investigating complaints and ensuring they weren't buried by administration. Hayes called Laura afterward, her voice shaking with emotion. I can't believe they're actually creating this position, actually listening. They're listening because you spoke up, Laura said, and because enough people spoke up after you that they couldn't ignore it anymore. I was terrified, still am, honestly. That's normal. Fear doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you're doing something that matters. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Thank you for going first, for showing the rest of us it was possible. After the call ended, Laura sat in the surgical lounge and felt the weight of what had happened settle over her. Not the dramatic moments, the confrontations and explosions and midnight raids, but the quieter aftermath, the systemic changes, the The cultural shift from protecting institutions to protecting people. That was what mattered. That was what would last. Colonel Reeves appeared in the doorway, out of uniform for the first time since Laura had met him. "Heard you turned down the federal consulting position," he said. "News travels fast. Always does in our circles." Reeves sat down. "They're disappointed. You could have done a lot of good in that role." "I'm doing good here." "I know." Reeves smiled. "That's why I'm not here to convince you otherwise. I'm here to tell you that your inactive reserve status has been updated to reflect your recent actions. Officially commended for extraordinary service during civilian crisis response." Laura raised an eyebrow. "They're giving me a medal for breaking into the mayor's building? They're recognizing that you conducted yourself with honor under impossible circumstances and saved lives while exposing corruption that threatened public safety." Reeves pulled out an envelope. "This is the official commendation, and this," he pulled out a second envelope, "is a letter from the Air Force Surgeon General thanking you for upholding the highest standards of military medicine." Laura took both envelopes but didn't open them. "I wasn't trying to uphold anything. I was just trying to keep people alive." "That's exactly why they're thanking you." Reeves stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Eric Brennan asked me to give you a message. He's entering witness protection after the trial, starting over somewhere new. But he wanted you to know that for the first time in his life, he actually believes things can get better." Laura felt something catch in her throat. "Tell him I'm glad." "Tell him yourself. He's being transferred through Redfield one more time next week for a medical evaluation before relocation. I'm sure he'd appreciate seeing you." After Reeves left, Laura opened the commendation letter and read it once. Then she filed it away and went back to work. The trial began 6 months later. Laura testified for 3 days. Medical timeline, documentation of Brennan's injuries, the systematic delays in treatment, her suspension, everything. Defense attorneys tried their best to discredit her, painting her as mentally unstable, vindictive, someone with an anti-authority complex. Laura answered every question calmly, backed up every statement with documentation, and never lost her composure even when they tried to rattle her with personal attacks. On the third day, after hours of cross-examination, the defense attorney made a final attempt. "Major Voss, isn't it true that you have a history of conflict with authority figures?" Laura looked at him steadily. "I have a history of questioning authority when authority is wrong. If you're conflating those two things, that says more about your perspective than mine." The courtroom was silent. The attorney tried again. "Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted Sergeant Halstead's actions as excessive when he was simply doing his job?" "No." "How can you be so certain?" "Because his job was to serve and protect. Instead, he assaulted an unconscious man, falsified reports, and threatened witnesses to cover up his crimes." Laura leaned forward slightly. "I know the difference between difficult decisions and deliberate abuse. What Halstead did was abuse, and the system that protected him was complicit in that abuse." The defense attorney sat down. Laura was dismissed from the stand. Eric Brennan testified the next week. His recovery had been remarkable. Physically healthy, mentally stronger than Laura had seen him. He told his story calmly, answered questions with careful precision, and never wavered even under aggressive cross-examination. When asked why he'd finally agreed to testify despite the risks, Brennan looked directly at the jury. "Because someone believed me when nobody else would. Someone risked everything to make sure I got justice. And I owe it to everyone else who got hurt, everyone who stayed quiet because they thought speaking up was pointless. I owe it to them to tell the truth." The trial lasted 8 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts for Sergeant David Halstead. 23 separate convictions including excessive force, evidence tampering, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. Guilty on all counts for Mayor Douglas Whitmore. 31 convictions including corruption, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. 6 other officials also convicted on various charges. Laura watched the verdicts come in from the hospital cafeteria, surrounded by staff who testified or supported the investigation. When the final guilty verdict was read, the room erupted in cheers. Tim hugged her hard enough to crack ribs. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Laura corrected. "Everyone who spoke up. Everyone who refused to stay quiet." That night, Laura went home to her small apartment and sat on her couch in silence. The media was calling it the biggest corruption scandal in Wyoming history. National news was covering the story. Politicians were promising reform. But Laura was thinking about smaller things. About Eric Brennan, who'd survived being invisible long enough to finally be seen. About Jennifer Hayes, who'd found courage when she thought she had none. About Officer Brady, who'd chosen accountability over comfort. About all the people who'd been hurt and dismissed and ignored for years, who finally got to tell their stories and be believed. Her phone rang. Unknown number, but Laura answered anyway. Major Voss, this is District Attorney Elena Morrison. I'm calling from Davidson County, about 3 hours south of Millbrook Falls. Laura sat up straighter. How can I help you? We have a situation here. Hospital staff reporting police misconduct, administration refusing to investigate, witnesses afraid to come forward. Morrison paused. I've been following your case, and I was hoping you might be willing to consult. Share what you learned. Help us navigate this before it becomes what happened in Millbrook Falls. Laura looked around her quiet apartment, thought about the offer from the federal government she'd turned down, thought about staying in one place versus going where she was needed. Send me the details, she said. I'll review them and let you know what I think. Thank you, really. What you did in Millbrook Falls, it gave a lot of people hope that these fights can actually be won. After hanging up, Laura sat there for a long time. Outside, Millbrook Falls settled into its evening routine, a city slowly learning to function without the corruption that had defined it for so long. And somewhere in the darkness, in other cities and other hospitals, other people were watching and learning and finding courage. Laura's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. You don't know me, but I work in a hospital in Colorado. We have the same problems you had. Reading about what you did made me realize I don't have to stay quiet anymore. Thank you. Then another message, and another. People across the country, all saying the same thing in different ways. You made it possible. You showed us how. You proved it could be done. Laura read each message carefully. Then she opened her laptop and started writing down everything she'd learned. Documentation strategies, building coalitions, protecting witnesses, navigating federal oversight. A playbook for people who wanted to fight but didn't know how. She was still writing when the sun came up. Laura was still writing when her office door opened without a knock. She looked up to find Eric Brennan standing there, wearing civilian clothes that actually fit and looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. They told me you'd be here, he said. Brennan? Laura stood quickly. I thought you were in witness protection. I am. Tomorrow. But I wanted to see you first. He stepped into the office, moving carefully like someone still getting used to a body that worked properly. The marshals gave me 2 hours. Laura gestured to a chair. Brennan sat down, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. I heard the sentencing came through, Brennan said finally. Halstead got 18 years federal. Whitmore got 23. Plus all the others, the police chief, the city attorney, 2 county supervisors. Laura closed her laptop. The whole network. Because you wouldn't let it go. Because enough people stopped being afraid. Laura met his eyes. Including you. Brennan looked down at his hands. I've been homeless for 6 years. You know what that does to a person? Makes you invisible. Makes you stop believing your life has value. He paused. When Halstead hit me that night, I remember thinking this was just how things were, that people like him could hurt people like me and nothing would ever change. But it did change. Yeah. Brennan looked up. Because you saw me, not as a problem or a junkie or something to ignore. You saw me as a person who deserved care. His voice caught slightly. Nobody's seen me like that in years. Laura felt something tighten in her chest. Where are you going? After tomorrow? Can't tell you. Witness protection rules. But somewhere with mountains and clean air and a job waiting at a construction company. Brennan smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. They're giving me a chance to start over. Be someone new. You were always someone. The system just refused to acknowledge it. Maybe, but you forced them to acknowledge it. Brennan stood up. I won't forget that. Won't forget you. He extended his hand. Laura shook it, feeling the calluses and scars of a life lived hard. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Major Voss. And thank you for everything. He left. Laura sat back down and stared at the empty doorway for a long time. Her phone buzzed, a text from Tim. You need to see this. Laura found him in the ER break room, gathered with a dozen other staff members around a television. The news was showing footage of Sergeant David Halstead being led into federal prison wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of a badge. The reporter's voice carried over the images. Halstead's sentencing marks the end of one of Wyoming's most extensive corruption scandals. Federal prosecutors say this case sends a clear message that no one is above the law, regardless of their position or connections. Then the footage cut to Mayor Whitmore, looking 20 years older as marshals escorted him to a different facility. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by prisoners' clothing. The man who'd controlled Millbrook Falls for over a decade was now just another inmate number. How does it feel? Tim asked quietly. Laura watched the screen. Like justice. Incomplete, imperfect, but real. They're saying you started a movement, that whistleblowers across the country are using what you did as a blueprint. I just refused to stay quiet when staying quiet meant people got hurt. That's what a movement is. Tim gestured to the screen. One person deciding enough is enough. Then another person. Then another. The news segment ended with footage of Laura herself, pulled from her courtroom testimony, looking tired but unbroken. We're getting calls, one of the nurses said. People wanting to know about our new patient advocacy program. Hospitals asking how we restructured to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Good, Laura said. Share everything. Make it impossible for other places to hide behind, we didn't know how. She returned to her office and found Administrator Patricia Werner waiting outside. Werner looked diminished somehow, smaller than Laura remembered, less certain. Major Voss? Do you have a moment? Laura unlocked her office door. Come in. Werner entered hesitantly. I wanted to apologize, formally, for suspending you, for enabling Halstead's behavior, for choosing institutional protection over patient care. Apology noted. I also wanted you to know that I've accepted a position at a small rural clinic, entry-level administration. It's a significant step down, but Werner's voice wavered. It's where I should have been working all along, somewhere the stakes are clear and the choice is less political. Laura studied her. What changed? Watching you testify, hearing you explain, calmly and with documentation, all the ways I'd failed in my basic responsibilities. Werner met her eyes. I spent my entire career convincing myself that compromise was necessary, that you couldn't run a hospital without making deals with powerful people. You proved that was a lie I told myself to avoid difficult choices. So what now? Now I try to do better, try to be the kind of administrator who supports people like you instead of punishing them. Werner stood. I know it doesn't fix what I did, but I wanted you to know that what you did, it didn't just change Millbrook Falls, it changed me too. After Werner left, Laura sat at her desk and thought about redemption, about whether people who'd enabled harm deserve second chances, about the difference between accountability and vindictiveness. She didn't have clean answers, just the messy reality of humans trying to be better than they were. The weeks after Brennan's departure settled into a new rhythm. The ER ran smoother than it ever had. New protocols, better communication, actual support from administration instead of obstruction. Laura hired Jennifer Hayes as her deputy director, giving the young nurse authority to investigate and address staff concerns before they became crises. 3 months after the trial, Laura received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Eric Brennan standing in front of mountains Laura didn't recognize, wearing work clothes and smiling like he'd finally found something worth smiling about. On the back, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for giving me my life back." Laura pinned the photo to her office wall, next to the commendations and certificates that documented her military service. A reminder that the work mattered, that individual lives saved were worth institutional fights. She was reviewing staffing schedules when Colonel Reeves called. Laura, I have a question, entirely hypothetical. I don't do well with hypothetical. Fair enough. Here's the actual question. Would you be willing to serve as a federal medical consultant, part-time, contract basis, reviewing cases where healthcare institutions might be complicit in civil rights violations? Laura leaned back in her chair. I thought I turned that down. You turned down a full-time position. This is different. You keep your ER director role, but you also help other communities navigate what you went through. Reeves paused. There are a lot of Millbrook Falls out there, Laura. A lot of people who need someone who understands both medicine and accountability. Let me think about it. Take your time. The offer's not going anywhere. Laura ended the call and looked around her office. The ER she'd rebuilt. The staff she'd trained. The protocols she'd written. It was good work, important work, but so was helping other people fight their own battles. She was still considering when Tim knocked on her door. You've got a visitor. Says it's important. The visitor was Officer Mark Brady, now wearing the uniform of a training academy instructor instead of street patrol. Major Voss. He shook her hand firmly. I wanted to update you. The department's new accountability office is fully operational. 23 officers have been disciplined or terminated based on complaint reviews, and we've implemented mandatory training on appropriate use of force and medical rights for people in custody. That's significant progress. It's a start. Brady hesitated. I'm also testifying at 3 more trials. Officers from neighboring departments who saw what happened here and decided it was time to expose their own corruption problems. Laura smiled. The ripple effect. Exactly. And it's happening because you showed everyone it was possible to win. Brady pulled out a folder. I also wanted to give you this. It's a letter from the Police Benevolent Association. They're creating an award in your name, the Major Laura Voss Award for Ethical Leadership in Medical Law Enforcement Relations. Laura opened the folder and read the letter. It was formal, bureaucratic, and completely sincere. I don't need an award, she said. Maybe not. But other people need to see that standing up to corruption gets recognized and celebrated, not just punished. Brady stood. You changed more than you know, Major Voss. Changed how people think about accountability. Changed what they believe is possible. After he left, Laura sat with the letter for a long time. Then she filed it away and went back to work. That evening, she drove to the Morrison Mill, the abandoned industrial complex where she'd found Eric Brennan bleeding and terrified months ago. The building was still condemned, still empty, but somehow it felt different now, less haunted. Laura stood in the main room where Halstead had held Brennan hostage, where she'd thrown a pipe to create a distraction, where federal agents had finally brought an end to years of institutional abuse. You look like you're searching for something. Laura turned. Agent Dutton stood in the doorway, backlit by the setting sun. Just thinking, Laura said. Dutton walked in, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. About what? About how much violence happened in this room, and how it's finally empty now. No more threats, no more fear. Laura looked around. Just a building waiting to be demolished or repurposed. Cities are like that. They carry their history, but they're not defined by it. Dutton stopped beside her. Millbrook Falls is different now. Better. Because you refuse to accept the old way of doing things. I just did what needed doing. That's what makes it matter. Dutton pulled out her badge. I'm being promoted. Federal oversight of healthcare corruption investigations. And I want you as my primary consultant. Reeves already offered me something similar. Then you're getting multiple offers. Take one. Take both. Or turn them all down and stay here. Dutton's smile was genuine. But whatever you choose, know that what you started isn't finished. It's just beginning. And people need someone who's already walked this path to show them the way. Laura looked at the empty building one last time. Then she nodded. I'll do it. The consulting work, part-time. But I'm keeping my ER position. I wouldn't expect anything else. They walked out together into the fading light. Millbrook Falls spread out below them. A city, healing, changing, learning to function without the corruption that had defined it for so long. Laura's phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. I'm a nurse in Texas. Your story gave me courage to report abuse I witnessed. They're investigating now. Thank you for showing us how. Then another. Hospital administrator in Michigan. We're implementing your patient advocacy model. Already seeing results. Then another. And another. Laura read each one, feeling the weight and responsibility of having become something she'd never intended to be. A symbol, a catalyst, proof that fighting powerful people wasn't futile. 6 months later, Laura stood in front of a packed auditorium at a national healthcare conference. The topic was institutional accountability and whistleblower protection. She'd been invited to deliver the keynote address. She looked out at hundreds of faces, doctors, nurses, administrators, policymakers, all waiting to hear what she had to say. I'm not good at speeches, Laura began. I'm better at chest compressions and trauma surgery. But I'm here because someone asked me what I learned from exposing corruption in my city, and I think the answer matters. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I learned that systems protect themselves, that power doesn't give itself up willingly, that speaking truth to authority means risking everything. Laura's voice strengthened. But I also learned that silence has a cost, that every time we see wrongdoing and look away, we become complicit in that wrong, and that the fear of consequences is nothing compared to the weight of knowing you could have stopped harm and chose not to. The auditorium was completely silent. What happened in Millbrook Falls wasn't special. It wasn't unique. It's happening right now in your cities, your hospitals, your institutions. The only question is whether you're going to be the person who stays quiet or the person who speaks up. Laura looked out at all those faces. It won't be easy. You'll face resistance, retaliation, people questioning your motives and your sanity. But you'll also find allies. You'll discover courage you didn't know you had. And you'll learn that doing the right thing, really doing it, despite the cost, is the only way to live with yourself. She stepped away from the podium. The applause started slowly, then built into something that filled the entire space. Afterward, dozens of people approached her with their own stories. Corruption they'd witnessed, abuse they'd documented, fear that had kept them quiet for years. Laura listened to each one, took notes, made connections, started building a network of people who refused to stay silent anymore. That night, back in her hotel room, she called Tim. How's the ER?
Running perfectly without you, which is annoying because I wanted to prove you were indispensable. Tim's voice carried a smile. When are you back? 2 days? Then I'm in Millbrook for a week before the next consulting assignment. You know you're becoming famous, right? The nurse who took down a corruption network. I'm not famous. I'm just doing work that matters. Same thing, depending on who's watching. Laura ended the call and looked out at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, people were making the same choices she'd made, to speak or stay silent, to act or accept, to fight or surrender. She hoped they chose to fight. 3 years after Sergeant Halstead's arrest, Laura stood in a rebuilt hospital wing, the section that had been damaged in the explosion. It was now the Patient Advocacy Center, with Jennifer Hayes running operations and a full staff dedicated to investigating concerns and protecting vulnerable patients. A dedication plaque hung near the entrance, in recognition of those who refused to stay silent. Laura read it once, then walked inside. The center was busy, patients filing complaints, staff conducting investigations, advocates coordinating with legal services. The system worked because people finally believed it would. Eric Brennan sent her a card every year on the anniversary of his rescue, never with a return address, but always with an update. He'd gotten his GED, found steady work, met someone, built a life that had seemed impossible when he'd been bleeding in an abandoned mill. Officer Brady now trained new recruits, teaching them that the badge was a responsibility, not a license. That protecting and serving meant everyone, especially the vulnerable, and Millbrook Falls kept changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Laura's consulting work took her across the country. Hospitals, police departments, government agencies, all wrestling with the same fundamental question. How do you fix a broken system from the inside? She told them the same thing every time. You start by refusing to accept that broken is normal. Then you document everything, find allies, build cases, and you never, ever let fear silence you. Some listened, some changed, some fought back and made her life difficult. Laura didn't care. She'd learned that doing the right thing meant accepting that not everyone would thank you for it. One evening, 5 years after the trial that had changed everything, Laura sat in her office at Redfield General, reviewing applications for the ER fellowship program she'd created. Young doctors and nurses who wanted to learn not just medicine, but advocacy, how to fight for patients when systems failed them. Tim knocked on her door. There's someone here to see you. Won't give a name, but says you'll want to talk to them. Laura looked up. Send them in. The woman who entered was maybe 40, wearing scrubs from a hospital Laura didn't recognize. She looked exhausted and determined in equal measure. Major Voss, I'm Dr. Sarah Nakamura from Portland. I have a situation at my hospital, police brutality being covered up by administration, witnesses being threatened, the whole thing. She pulled out a folder. I've documented everything, but I don't know what to do next, and everyone says you're the person who can help. Laura took the folder and opened it. The contents were painfully familiar. Medical records showing excessive force, complaint forms that had been buried, intimidation tactics, institutional protection of abuse. She looked up at Dr. Nakamura. How afraid are you? Terrified. But I'm more afraid of what happens if I stay quiet. Laura smiled. Then you're ready. She pulled out her laptop and opened the playbook she'd been building for 5 years. Step-by-step documentation strategies, legal resources, federal contacts, media relations, witness protection protocols. Everything she'd learned, systematized, and ready to share. Here's what we're going to do, Laura said. Outside her office, the ER continued its endless rhythm. Lives saved, crises managed, humans at their most vulnerable being cared for by humans who'd chosen to help. And somewhere in Portland, someone else was about to make the same choice Laura had made years ago, to see injustice and refuse to look away. The fight wasn't over. It would never be over. But for the first time in her life, Laura understood that wasn't a failure. It was just the cost of caring enough to keep fighting. She looked at Dr. Nakamura, who was reading through the playbook with growing hope in her eyes, and remembered standing exactly where this woman stood, alone, afraid, but determined to do what was right despite the cost. One more thing, Laura said. When this gets hard, and it will get hard, remember that you're not doing this alone, that every person who's fought this fight before you is standing with you, and every person who fights it after you will be standing on the foundation you build. Dr. Nakamura nodded. Like you did for me. Like someone did for me once, a long time ago. Laura pulled up her contact list. Now let's make some calls and show Portland what accountability actually looks like. They worked late into the night, building a case, assembling allies, preparing for the storm that would come when powerful people realized they were about to be exposed. And Laura felt something she hadn't felt in years,
Not satisfaction exactly, but purpose. The bone-deep certainty that the work mattered, that individual acts of courage could change systems, that refusing to stay silent was always worth the cost. The city lights of Millbrook Falls glowed outside her window. Imperfect, healing, better than it had been. And tomorrow, Laura would wake up and do it all again, save lives, fight injustice, and show everyone watching that one person standing up could make more difference than 1,000 people staying quiet. Because that was the truth they tried to bury, the truth that powerful people feared most, that courage was contagious, that justice was possible, and that ordinary people who refused to accept wrong could change everything. Laura looked at Dr. Nakamura working intently on documentation and smiled. The fight continued.